Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, March 24th, 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, William Neuman, author of Things Are Never So Bad That They Can't Get Worse Inside the Collapse of Venezuela, and MRLive, congressional candidate in Pennsylvania's 12th district. Meanwhile, the political theater of questioning Ketanji Brown Jackson in her confirmation hearings is over, thank the non-existent Lord. Today, legal interest groups will testify on her behalf. And on Monday, the Senate will vote, so expect her to get confirmed. And here's why those confirmations are important. Yesterday, the Supreme Court threw out Wisconsin's redistricting plans, which were approved by a Republican state Supreme Court judge, which is a huge, and now it's a huge blow to the Voting Rights Act in the state. Biden is meeting with the rest of NATO to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They're set to talk about an increased presence along the eastern flank, as Russia says they'll consider using nuclear weapons if there is a, quote, existential threat. Great. It has now officially been 1 month since the invasion began. A New York prosecutor who resigned shortly after the new DA, Alvin Bragg, took over, has released a statement, an open letter, explaining his outrage over Bragg not pursuing a Trump indictment. Trump is, quote, guilty of numerous felony violations, the prosecutor says.
What?
What's that? Felony, you say?
Talk to my lawyers. I don't got time for this.
The Biden administration is likely to recommend a second booster for those 65 and older as new COVID cases begin to creep up again. And Moderna will seek authorization for its COVID vaccine shots for babies, toddlers, and young children. Lastly, as predicted, Idaho's Republican governor has signed its near-total abortion ban modeled after Texas's law. That means abortions after 6 weeks are banned in the state. Governor Little called it unwise, but he signed it anyway. He is facing a far-right primary challenge, so female sacrifices are needed. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. We have a great show for you today. I might have some disagreements with our author on Venezuela, which makes it an interesting conversation, but I'm excited to get into it. And I'm really excited to have MRLive on for sure. I want to keep highlighting some congressional candidates. And MRLive has been endorsed by Sunrise Movement, Justice Democrats, Bernie Sanders himself. She was a Bernie Sanders organizer. And is currently in the Pennsylvania State House. So she has firsthand experiences with that crazy Republican legislature there. And I'm excited to get into that with her after we speak to William Neuman. But first, as the Supreme Court hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson come to a close in terms of her testimony, interest groups are going to be testifying on her behalf today and being questioned as well by the Senate. But the vote is set to happen on Monday. We are yet again reminded of the importance of the Supreme Court. Yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled on a Wisconsin redistricting case, and I wanted to highlight this at the top of the show. They essentially threw out Wisconsin's new legislative districts and claimed that it was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Everyone check out Mark Joseph Stern. We've had him on this program multiple times. He's the number one person, in my opinion, who's covering the Supreme Court at Slate. I'm going to be reading from his piece on this today. Wednesday's unsigned decision, issued through a shadow docket, hands Wisconsin Republicans an unexpected victory in their quest to reduce Black representation in the legislature. It also alters the law of redistricting in fundamental yet cryptic ways that might, to a cynic, seem designed to disadvantage Democrats in every single case. I am said cynic, and that is the case. So what's insane about this ruling in particular is that a Republican Supreme Court justice essentially greenlit this redistricting plan. Wisconsin Republicans sued or appealed or whatever and brought it to the Supreme Court, and it was considered a Hail Mary and something that probably would not work out in their favor. But this Supreme Court is so far right that it sided with them anyway. So, as Stern describes it, it's an astonishing, inexplicable decision here. Wisconsin legislature versus Wisconsin Elections Commission is an unusual case. It arose because the state's Democratic governor and GOP-controlled legislature could not agree on new maps following the 2020 census. The Wisconsin Supreme Court stepped in to referee the dispute, allowing parties to submit draft maps for its consideration, including Governor Tony Evers and legislative leaders. A majority declared it would abide by a least change rule, selecting the maps that made the fewest changes to the current plan. Applying this standard, the court adopted Evers' map in March. Notably, Justice Brian Haggerty, a conservative Republican, authored the majority opinion. His decision largely preserved the current Republican gerrymander, but it also increased the number of majority Black assembly districts in Milwaukee from 6 to 7. Now, Milwaukee's Black population has increased. Evers and the decision makers in this instance basically said like that's why there needs to be an additional seat. And the Republican Supreme Court in Wisconsin, or at least the Republican who issued the majority opinion for the Supreme Court, agreed. It was not by any means some sort of radical redistricting. It was one designed to do the least redistricting, tweaking it a bit, while also attempting to represent the new Black residents in Milwaukee. Evers believed that due to the growth of Milwaukee's Black population over the decade, the current map diluted minority votes in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Black residents were now packed into too few districts. Republicans appealed Haggerty's decision. That was Evers' reasoning. But let's skip to when they appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that it constituted an illegal 21st century racial gerrymander. On Wednesday, SCOTUS agreed. The majority admitted that it wasn't sure whether to fault Evers or Haggerty, which is for adopting the 7th district, so it blamed both of them. First, it claimed that Evers put forth insufficient evidence demonstrating that without a 7th majority Black district, the plan would violate the Voting Rights Act. Second, it faulted Haggerty for failing to consider whether a race-neutral alternative that did not add a 7th majority Black district would deny Black voters equal political opportunity. So Sonia Sotomayor dissented along with Elena Kagan. We don't have a record of the votes based on like this new shadow docket strategy that the Supreme Court, it's not new, but they're seemingly adopting it more and more. But Stern goes into the analysis of why the decision is ridiculous. But the number one reason here is the decision rewarded the Republicans for making this case. Here, Stern writes, in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Republicans argued that the VRA required multiple majority Black districts in Milwaukee. They then ambushed the courts with last-minute complaints about an alleged racial gerrymander. SCOTUS rewarded their behavior, accusing Haggerty of failing to undertake an analysis that no party asked him to undertake, because he was basically going forward with the standard of let's tweak the maps, let's try to incorporate new black voters in Milwaukee, he wasn't looking at it through a Voting Rights Act analysis. And then the Supreme Court essentially accuses him of not using that analysis. And here's the real key point that I wanted to get to. In the Alabama redistricting case that the Supreme Court recently undertook, they talked about how in Alabama, the decision to basically allow for them to gerrymander racially was due to the fact that it was too close to an election. They did not use that analysis here. There's a third problem with the decision that Sotomayor does not mention. It flagrantly violates the Purcell rule. This rule holds that federal courts should not alter state election laws shortly before an election. The conservative justices have invoked it relentlessly to freeze lower court decisions expanding voting rights. In February, they deployed it to block a decision requiring Alabama to undergo its egregious racial gerrymander because the primaries were 3.5 months away. Now, the conservatives have pushed aside Purcell to overturn Wisconsin's legislative map when the primaries are 4.5 months away. So there you have it. They're contradicting themselves state by state in order to ensure Republican hegemony. And that's the reality here.
Yeah, it's a loaded dice against your voting rights.
Yep. Wanted to highlight that. And in the meantime, we'll just let's look at this quickly. Because Cory Booker, this is going to be a Cory Booker heavy show today. We have a clip of him talking about crypto that we'll play later in the program. But these hearings were so insane and filled with not so subtle racial dog whistles directed at Ketanji Brown Jackson. She had to sit through assaults on her character. This happens often with Supreme Court nominees. But they were more egregious because of her race and her gender.
Yeah, if you wanted to look at what the inquisitors of the Salem witch trials look like when they were interrogating people back in Salem, this is the modern equivalent of it.
Yes, and so Cory Booker felt the need to bring it back and put his historic nature of her nomination into context after the Republicans were so adversarial and ridiculous. Now, Cory Booker, I just wish he wasn't so Cory Booker here. He's so corny. Yeah. But at the same time, her tears and her reaction are moving, and I think something that we should be highlighting.
Yeah, Cory knows his audience for some of this stuff.
Right.
I went to law school. I didn't serve on the law review. You did. I didn't clerk at every level of the federal court. You clerked for a Supreme Court justice, one widely respected on both sides, which really shaped you. And you did not get there because of some left-wing agenda. You didn't get here because of some dark money groups. You got here how every Black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done, by being like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in heels. And I want to tell you, when I look at you, this is why I get emotional. I'm sorry, you're a person that is so much more than your race and gender. You're a Christian, you're a mom, you're an intellect, you love books. But for me, I'm sorry, it's hard for me not to look at you and not see my mom, not to see my cousins, one of them who had to come here and sit behind you. She had to have your back. I see my ancestors and yours. Nobody's going to steal the joy of that woman in the street, or the calls that I'm getting, or the texts. Nobody's going to steal that joy. You have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American.
That's it? Okay. Look, again, I feel like I'm constantly beating back my own cynicism when I know that that's not the main point. It's just I hate the grandstanding. I hate it.
Although, I mean, that's what this is an opportunity for,
Yes.
really.
And it seems like it gets worse every year, every Supreme Court nominee, because people recognize and senators recognize this is a good opportunity for them and to raise their profile, maybe raise some money as well. But he is right that this is historic, and it's been lost in the Ted Cruz attacks on her about, do you know what a woman is? Am I an Asian man? Like the ridiculous ways that they're trying to appeal to their base. Underneath all of that is the fact that we're about to very, very likely have a black woman for the first time on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and what she's been put through by the GOP has been heinous and disgusting.
Yes. And frankly, it's not even somebody whose record I have a ton of quibbles with. I mean, look, judges, you're not going to be a DSA activist and be a judge, but she's done a lot of really good work within the confines of her profession as compared to someone else that, Biden was considering, like Childs, for example. So I think, can feel really good on, one, the historic nature of her nomination, and also the quality of the jurist and her background as a public defender, among many other things. So within the confines of who Biden was going to nominate, I'm very happy with her. I think she also conducted herself incredibly well. And let's just also not let the broader historicism and milestone get lost in all of this ridiculous politicking by the senators here.
Yeah.
So again, Corey, I wish you were a little less cringe, but the sentiment is
exactly. I
is
do.
right.
I think, like, Corey can go for it in this moment. I also agree with what Jeremy Flood said. Theater kids need to be stopped, in my opinion.
That is the energy, right? That is the energy. Corey was really monologuing. Mr. Johnson is going to be pleased. We're going to get the best part in Chicago. All right, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined by William Neuman. We are back, and we are joined by William Neuman, author of Things Are Never So Bad That They Can't Get Worse Inside the Collapse of Venezuela. William, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me.
So, yeah, of course. So you lived in Venezuela for a few years, and you lived really, during the collapse in the mid, 2010. So let's just start there about your experience
Sure.
living in Venezuela and how that informed the subject of your book.
Sure. Well, I was very fortunate in when I got down there because I went down there. I was at the New York Times, and so I went down there as the Andes region correspondent. And I lived in Caracas for 4 years, and I got there in 2012. And 2012 was a boom year in Venezuela. So I got to see the country when it was booming and full of money. And that year, Chavez, the previous year, had come down with cancer. And then he declared himself cancer-free because in 2012, he was running for re-election. So I got to be there and cover the last election campaign of Chavez. I got to see the country when oil was over $100 a barrel. And then, of course, the next year, after Chavez is reelected, he dies from cancer in early 2013. And he has already designated Maduro as his successor. And so Maduro wins the replacement election. And there's basically, so then I got to see the beginning of the whole Maduro thing. And there's basically two crises that happen in Venezuela, one after the other. First, there's the political crisis where Chavez dies. And Chavez was the great caudillo and the sort of center of all political gravity in the country. And so he dies, and that initiates this political crisis. And then a year later, the price of oil falls, and that begins the economic crisis. And so Maduro becomes president, and he's very uncertain politically, very unstable, and he has to both fend off an energized opposition after Chavez's death and all sorts of factions within Chavismo who don't necessarily trust him or want him there. And then the price of oil drops, and ultimately by the beginning of 2015, it gets down to, I think, close to $30 a barrel. And that
from
means
what? From $100 a barrel?
It had been over 100, yeah. It had been up to
yeah.
almost 120. And so essentially what happens in Venezuela is they ran out of money because oil is really almost the only game economically in Venezuela. They have the biggest oil reserves in the world. And they had, during the boom years of the 2000s, when oil prices went through the roof, they never saved any money. So there was nothing in the bank when the price of oil dropped. And so they essentially run out of money, and that begins this sort of horrible economic crisis, which, has resulted in 8 consecutive years of economic contraction. They lost 80% of their GDP. I mean, it's the kind of, depression, economic depression that's almost inconceivable. Hyperinflation, all sorts of problems, this huge refugee outflow. And so I was there for the beginning of all that. I come back to New York, but then I continued to return to Venezuela to report over the years. And I especially spent a lot of time there in 2019 writing the book, which was the year of these massive nationwide power blackouts and the whole the start of Maduro's second term, and then Juan Guaido declares himself president, and the U.S. is coming down on them with sanctions, and Trump is threatening to invade. And so I saw all that firsthand as well. And then I was just back a couple months ago and writing some more. So.
Wow. All right. Well, Trump threatening to invade. I almost put that in my black box of my memory hole, right? I don't even want to imagine and think about that anymore.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing there is that, it was all bluster because Trump comes out and he says, we're considering all our options, including military options, which means I want to invade. And I think he even said, Bolton, I think in his memoir says that Trump says it would be cool to invade. But the fact is that the Defense Department they refused to do any planning for any kind of military action in Venezuela. They just ignored it all.
Well, good.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, the important thing to understand about all that, and, especially when we're talking about sanctions as well, is that Trump never had a Venezuela foreign policy. He only had a Florida election strategy that utilized Venezuela. So everything he did wasn't in the hopes of reaching some sort of suitable, beneficial outcome for Venezuela. It was about being able to use Venezuela as an edge in Florida elections. And it was very successful because in the midterms, when Trump was president, they win the governorship and another Senate seat. And then in 2020, Trump wins Florida and the Democrats lose a couple of, congressional seats. And what happens now is that Biden inherits this, mess, and his hands are tied, because if he tries to change what Trump did, it's going to have electoral repercussions in Florida again. And I think the Democrats are terrified of that.
Yeah, and in terms of using Venezuela for his election strategy, a lot of that pins on the fact that socialism as a concept has like a brand cachet that can be used for domestic purposes by right-wing organizations here in the U.S., but in terms of how it was used in Venezuela as well for their domestic politics, that's something that's really interesting I want to get into as well. But you mentioned U.S. sanctions there and how the effect of U.S. sanctions. I'm particularly interested in that as a podcast based in the United States. How did that have an effect on the fact that there is, as you say, no money in Venezuela, exacerbating the economic collapse that happened in the mid-2010s?
Well, it comes in stages, because the way that the economic crisis begins in Venezuela is actually when Chavez is running for re-election in 2012. And they're borrowing billions of dollars. They're spending as much money as they can to juice the economy up so that they can get this sort of sick and dying Chavez across the finish line and win the election, which they do. But by now, the economy's in trouble because there's all these, there's tremendous, all this deficit spending, the economy's too hot. And then Maduro comes in and he doesn't know how to handle it. And he sort of, continues with a bunch of policies that need to be changed, but he's too uncertain to make any changes. And then the price of oil drops and they run out of money, not good. And then Trump comes into office and Trump starts hitting Venezuela with these, with these general sanctions. There's two kinds of sanctions. There's individual ones against, bad guys or perceived bad guys. And then there's general sanctions that hit the whole economy. And the first one basically shuts Venezuela pretty much off from the US financial system, which means they're being shut off from the world financial system because so much of it goes through the US. And that exacerbates the problem. So you have this already existing economic crisis, and it's going to get worse now because they're piling on these sanctions that make things more difficult economically for Venezuela. And then ultimately, in 2019, you have this phenomenon where Juan Guaido, this young legislator, declares himself president. The U.S. backs him and recognizes him as a legitimate president of Venezuela. All these other countries do as well. And John Bolton is sitting there in the White House, Tennessee, and he says, let's go for the win. That's his quote that he reports. And so he pushes through the oil sanction, which is essentially an oil embargo. The U.S. used to be the main buyer of Venezuelan oil. And it basically bans Venezuelan oil sales to the U.S. And that's sort of like the ultimate sanction. And it's interesting now because this is all in the news, because there's this debate about whether or not to lift the oil sanctions. Biden sent this group of envoys to talk to Maduro in Caracas. And one of the things they talked about was, once again, the U.S. buying Venezuelan oil. And that immediately gets this fierce backlash from politicians, especially in Florida, where it's an election issue, against ever, doing anything to soften the U.S. stance toward Maduro. And it's interesting because you have to ask, well, why do we have the oil sanction? And we don't have it because somebody sat down and said, well, this is, we've scoped out all the possibilities and this is the best way to go forward. We have it because John Bolton said, let's go for the win. And he slammed the biggest sanction, sort of the biggest baseball bat they had, to whack them over the head. But I've talked to people, and it's in the book. What I discovered is that there was a fierce debate about whether or not to use the oil sanction. And before Bolton, you had McMaster at the NSC, and his people charted out this very careful sort of escalating use of sanctions, both in the individual and general. And at the very end, they put the oil sanction. And in talking to them, these people told me that they never envisioned using it because it could be so devastating to the Venezuelan economy and essentially to ordinary Venezuelans. And the way it was described to me, it was like one person called it the nuclear bomb of sanctions. Another person called it, they described it as like a break glass in case of emergency thing. In other words, if their goal was to get rid of Maduro, if they saw that he just needed like one more push to go, then you use that sanction, and this is how they see it. And then he's gone, and then you lift the sanction. But the way this person described it, he says, if that doesn't happen, then you're stuck with it, and you have another Cuba. And essentially, Venezuela has become the new Cuba because now you have this sort of total embargo on Venezuela with no benefits from it. No benefits to the Venezuelan people. You're not achieving your stated goal of getting rid of Maduro. And the only benefit is to Republican politicians in Florida.
Right, and it echoes some of what was happening in the lead up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where there were a lot of Republican politicians pushing for preemptive sanctions. I mean, I'm on the left. I find that to be a ridiculous concept, but like you saying that Venezuela's turned into the new Cuba is really fascinating to me, because it's essentially like a political anti-commie football for Republican politicians, and once you begin those sanctions, as you say, and you begin that kind of punitive treatment, it's really hard for like a centrist Democrat like Biden, or he perceives it this way, to walk that back because of the political ramifications. I guess talk a little bit, I want to get more into Venezuela domestically, but could you talk a little bit more about that dynamic?
About the dynamic where Biden is stuck with these policies?
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, you have this sort of ultimate sanction on Venezuela, and its existence is now its justification. In other words, because it's there, we can't lift it. Oh, well, why do we have it in the first place? We have it because somebody who didn't think about the consequences, wanted to go all out and, try and get rid of Maduro, and it didn't work. But now we're stuck with it. The Democrats were just spanked in Florida in 2020. Trump wins the state. They lose 2 congressional seats. And the Republicans, this wasn't the only reason, the Republicans out-organized the Democrats in Florida. But they also conducted this, campaign bombarding, especially Hispanic voters, with this message. Biden's a socialist, he's Maduro's friend, he's going to turn the U.S. into Venezuela. And there's not a lot of Venezuelan American voters, but in Florida there's a lot of Cuban Americans, Colombian Americans, Nicaraguan Americans, and they all respond to this same message. And so, and now you see that happening now, where there's talk about, do we buy Venezuelan oil again? And Marco Rubio and others come out against it, and then Val Demings comes out against it because she's running against Marco Rubio, et cetera, Menendez in New Jersey. So you're stuck, and you really don't have a lot of options. And basically, Biden, I think, has just kept hands off with Venezuela mostly because they don't see any way that they can win there. They can only get burned. And he's got a million other problems, obviously. So there hasn't been much attention to Venezuela. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I except that when you are static and your predecessor is a far right winger, you are just essentially maintaining those policies, including the recognition of Guaido as the leader, which Biden was at a democracy summit talking about how that is the reality, when Maduro has a ton of problems, but Guaido is not the leader of Venezuela. Well, I mean, can you talk about that policy?
No, absolutely. Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. At this moment, inside Venezuela, almost nobody talks about Guaido. Inside Venezuela, Guaido is essentially irrelevant. Outside Venezuela is where he has relevance, and that means essentially in Washington and Miami. So, the U.S. and a few other countries continue to recognize him as president. But the way I describe Guaido in the book is that Guaido was essentially a bubble that lasted about 4 months. in January of 2019, he declares himself president. It's done in coordination with the White House and the State Department, and probably the Colombians as well. And I don't mean that it was some sort of U.S. Maneuver or operation. It was something that, came out of Venezuela. They told the State Department, and the State Department got on board, essentially. But it was done in coordination with the U.S., but not in coordination with the other elements of the opposition in Venezuela. Guaido belongs to a small party that essentially, on its own, decided to, take this chance, this risky gambit and see what happened. And so he gets a tremendous sort of boost at the beginning because the U.S. and all these, 50 other countries recognize him as a legitimate president. And the fact is that Maduro engineered his reelection the year before in 2018 by banning the other popular politicians who could run against him, banning them from running. He monkeyed with the election rules. He moved up the date of the election. And he essentially, the opposition sort of fell for it, decided to boycott the election, and Maduro's reelected, but it wasn't, you can't consider that a legitimate election because of the manipulation of the other candidates and the election rules.
Yes,
so,
both things can be true, right? Like Guaido cannot be the president and the election right. I mean, you can hold two thoughts in your mind at the same time.
Right. The opposition could have come, because Maduro's term starts in January, and the opposition is trying to figure out how to deal with this new term of this guy who's not legitimately elected. And they could have gone to the populace and said, look, we've got this unusual situation here. We're going to act as an opposition against it. But they choose this clause in the Constitution, which they claim, requires Guaido, who at the time was the head of the National Assembly, to step in as president. But it was a political decision. Anyway, so he becomes, he declares himself president. There's this huge outflowing of support in the country, tons of demonstrations because people are fed up. I mean, the country's been, in an economic hole for years at that point, and there was repression and all these refugees going out. It was a terrible crisis, still is. And so there was a lot of popular support from Guaido, for Guaido. And, but then nothing happens because there was never a plan. There wasn't a strategy where we're going to declare ourselves president, then we'll do this and this. It was just sort of magical thinking where they hoped that the military would rise up and get rid of Maduro, or the gringos would invade. And none of that ever happened. And so Guaido sort of putters along for a few months. There were a few sort of big, I don't know if you remember, they were going to bring in all this aid into the country, and the U.S. flies these huge military planes into Colombia and unload all this aid, and they can't bring it in. And then he stages this very strange sort of coup that's not really a coup, where he's standing outside on this overpass. I don't know if you remember all that.
Yes,
but anyway, there was a lot of sort of mistakes that were made, and that goes on for a few months. And then everybody just walks away because Guaido comes in promising, instant gratification, promising immediate results. We're going to get rid of Maduro, and he can't, and he doesn't, because he's not really president. He doesn't really have a government. And there was never a plan or a real strategy to get it done. And so then, after 4 months, basically the air goes out of Guaido. And then 6 months later, you have that strange mini invasion by that guy Goudreau, who sends these people into on these two boats. One group of people on a boat is killed. The other boat has these two American Green Berets who are taken prisoner and are still there in prison. And that was sort of like the last hurrah. He's still there. He still, calls himself the president of Venezuela, but people in Venezuela have moved on, including, the political parties, and they want to take a more realistic course to try and act as a responsible opposition.
Right.
And yet it's all frozen in Washington. Washington doesn't recognize any of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that Right, exactly. And I've been frustrated in many. I think a lot of what the Biden administration's done in response to this Russian invasion has been good. Some of it I haven't agreed with, but stuff in terms of not reversing Trump's radical foreign policy and just kind of maintaining it in terms like Title 42 at the border. That's not foreign policy, but his posture towards Venezuela. I mean, the Biden administration has taken a really passive approach to that I think is not going to work out for them in the long run. But I don't want to get too bogged down in domestic politics here. I want to turn a little bit more specifically to Venezuela and to the right in this country, or to the see, I'm back, but to the right, everything that I don't like is socialism, right? The Venezuela is this socialist hellscape is how it's presented, when in reality, that's not exactly the case in terms of how the Venezuelan economy is organized. Can you talk a little bit more about that distinction and why it's important to understanding socialist politics
Sure.
internationally and in Venezuela as well?
Well, I mean, my take, and it's not a very common one, is that Venezuela isn't and never has been a socialist country. Socialism well, Chavez wasn't a socialist, he was a populist. And Chavez was one of the first people in this new wave of autocrats that we see around the world who come to power through democratic means. And then once they're in power, they dismantle the democratic system to stay in power. And they take away the checks and balances and, you know, other things that we've seen in many countries. I mean, it's interesting because Chavez first takes office in 1999, and the other political figure who's on the scene now who takes office in 99 is Vladimir Putin. But Chavez didn't invent a lot of these things, but he showed that they still worked. Chavez, populism in this sense is you have this charismatic leader who has this direct connection with the people. They call them the people, but the people isn't everybody. It's just the supporters of the leader. And it's important to sort of mine the increasing polarization of society and the electorate in order to have enemies and stay in power. There's the people, and then everybody else is the enemy who's in league with foreign enemies. It's a thing that we've seen repeated all over now in Hungary and Poland and in Brazil and in Russia as well. And now with Maduro especially, it includes taking over of media outlets, eliminating opposition media, that sort of thing. And also, you know, with Maduro increasing repression. But getting back to socialism, so Chavez comes in, and you know, socialism in Venezuela for Chavez is really a form of branding. It's a form of marketing. It's a way to sell the personality and the cause of the president. And it's a very popular, sexy thing. And and there's a long tradition in Latin America that he sort of taps into. But there was never any real attempt in Venezuela. Venezuela has always been a market-oriented capitalist country. One of the interesting things about Venezuela that makes it different from other countries is that oil is such a big part of the economy, and the government has controlled the oil industry for decades. So the government has always had this very central role in the economy, much more than in other countries. So even before Chavez, you had that, and Venezuela was second only to Cuba in terms of government control of the economy. And Chavez comes in, and he sort of reverts to what was popular in Latin America in the 60s and 70s, when there were a lot of government takeovers of certain industries or important companies, or the government would create companies or build steel mills and stuff. And then that was the trend in the 60s and 70s. In the 80s and 90s, it was reversed, and all these governments sold all these things. And Chavez comes in and he buys them back, or he starts new ones. But that's not socialism. That's just, you know, state participation in the economy.
So then what do how do you categorize the redistribution of that oil wealth downward? I mean, there was that was what was done by Chavez that was successful in a way.
Well, I wouldn't call it successful. What I would say is that governments in Venezuela had always taken the oil money and used it, for social programs and other things. What happens is that you get the oil boom in the 70s, but then by the 80s, you've got the bust. And so Venezuela goes through the 80s and 90s in this horrible period of economic stagnation. And so the governments had no money to spend on social programs. Chavez comes in and he's very lucky because the price of oil goes up. He's got all this money to spend. And yes, he does create what he calls the missions, which are social programs of all sorts, educational programs, clinics, building hospitals and bridges and infrastructure. The problem is that it was so badly done. In other words, it's great to come in and say, well, I'm going to teach people to, I'm going to start a medical school. But when the students come out of the medical school and they can't work as doctors because the school is so badly operated that they didn't learn, that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help to say, well, we're going to, they did, one of the things they did that was successful for a while is that they created this whole system of clinics. It was called Barrio Dentro, these small clinics throughout the country, especially in poor areas, that were staffed by Cuban doctors. And that worked, and it was popular, but there was no follow through. So over time, the whole thing was essentially abandoned. I mean, I was all over the country. Sometimes I would find these clinics working, and often I would find them just empty and sitting there. So there was the management of these programs was terrible, and there was a tremendous amount of waste and corruption involved in all of these things. What the Chavistas like to do is they say that the period before Chavez was all this sort of like hellscape where everything was bad and corrupt and nothing worked and the poor got nothing. And then the opposition likes to say that the period before Chavez was this golden era. And neither one is true. Chavez doesn't come out of nowhere. Chavez is born from what came before. And a lot of what he did mimics what was done before. He just had more money to do it with. And, unfortunately, he had more money to waste as well. And there was more money to steal. So he does these things, but he does them badly. And I don't think that that's socialism. I don't think when you look at the poor in Venezuela today, they're more poor, more extreme poor, and they're worse off than before.
Well, and that you can trace that to the reliance, I guess, on oil as the end all be all. Really, I mean, you can.
Well, I'm careful because there's ways to manage the oil income.
Right.
Chavez saved nothing during all those years. I mean, for instance, I also covered Bolivia, and Bolivia was very different because Bolivia also had a boom because Bolivia has a lot of natural gas. And they had a boom in selling natural gas to Argentina and Brazil. And Bolivia saved huge amounts of money so that when the price fell, they had a big cushion to work with. The Chavistas saved nothing. There was zero saved in Venezuela there was no rainy day fund. There was no planning for that. And, a lot of countries in the 70s, in that first oil boom, these oil countries went through the same sort of process. They went through this boom and then this terrible bust, and they, had a hard time recovering from that. A lot of those countries learned from that experience. Venezuela did not, and they made the same mistakes again.
So, but if it's poor in its execution, how is that not socialism then? Just because it's poor in its execution, or because you find the way that it was distributed not to be in keeping, it was not a centralized system, is what you're saying?
I mean, what is socialism? Is socialism a bunch of public benefit programs? Is it a command economy? Is it the road to communism? We could sit around and talk about all those things, but I think that in what I saw in Venezuela was that socialism was used as a rallying cry, but there was no execution. In other words, there was no serious attempt. It was a branding, which is, as you pointed out, it's also a branding in the United States in the opposite way. In other words, in Venezuela, it was like a sexy branding, socialism, whiter, brighter teeth. And in Florida, it's socialism, the boogeyman, right?
Yeah, I fair enough. Yeah, I think that That makes a lot of sense. And we touched on it a little bit at the start of our interview, but I just wanted to go through the history. What you were living there as well during the time when oil crashed and what that looked like in the mid 2010s in Venezuela.
Well, what it looked like, it didn't look good. It was very ugly. Essentially, you know, the country's income disappeared largely, and what you had was you had tremendous shortages of basic products. And what the government did, I mean, this gets complicated, but the government used price control. See, the government has subsidized products. One of them is gasoline. Gasoline was essentially free, but also a lot of basic foodstuffs. And so those would be sold really cheaply in the stores. And when the crisis started, people would buy up these cheap products in the stores and then sell them on the street for much higher prices. Or those products would be smuggled into Colombia where they could be sold at market prices. And so you had, so you would get these extreme shortages of basic goods, and the stores would be empty, but on the street you could buy anything, but at a much elevated price. And so it got to the point where the government, you had assigned shopping days. So depending on the last number of your identification card, you could shop on certain days of the week, and the government would they had to send soldiers to patrol these. There would be immense lines outside of stores, people waiting to get inside, and they sent soldiers to check people's ID cards and stuff like that. And people would go in these stores and they would buy whatever was there. They didn't care what it was because, you know, it wasn't what they needed, but they could get it and they could sell it to somebody who did need it and then buy something else, whether it was corn flour or you know, something else they needed. So there were all these terrible dislocations that really, really hurt ordinary people as that was happening. And that was before the sanctions began.
Gotcha. Well, I literally just saw the time and realized that we're almost out of it. So I wanted to, it's a bit of a hard transition, but I definitely want to get to this with you. What is the state of the non-Maduro left in Venezuela? I mean, what are some, is there any leftist opposition alternatives that's growing in Venezuela because of, you know, something to combat the bloatedness and yes, the corruption that you talk about?
Well, the left isn't, the left was never just a right-wing left in Venezuela. I mean, Chavez and Maduro have always characterized it as that, like a bunch of right-wingers in league with the gringos and with the Colombians. And that was never the case. I mean, yes, there is a right and a hard right element to the Venezuelan left, but opposition, but a lot of it was pretty centrist. And like people like Enrique Capriles, who ran against Chavez for president and then Maduro, he's, you know, a centrist and in some ways might even be a left of center centrist. I think that especially at that point in Venezuela, there was a recognition that you were always going to have to maintain, you know, really important, significant social benefits and programs. Henry Falcone, who ran against Maduro in 2018, I think you could also put in that class. But more recently, as the country has just fallen apart and Maduro became more repressive, you have this dissident Chavismo. So you have a lot of people who've left Chavismo, who are on the left, who either have broken off and criticized Maduro or have joined forces with the sort of more mainstream opposition. And especially lately, Maduro has started to throw some of those people in jail. And, you know, it's intriguing to wonder if he is hurting himself by creating a common cause from between the more mainstream left and this, you know, the more mainstream opposition and the left opposition that has more recently split off. But they tend to be, it tends to be a fairly small group in terms of how vocal it is. But I would say that, I mean, the problem that the population, I mean, the problem the opposition has, it has many problems, one of which is that it seems often more eager to fight among itself than to fight with the government. But I was talking to Capriles when I was there last fall, and he said it's not enough to be against a dictatorship. You have to offer people something for them to give you their support. And so I think that the great sort of mass of Venezuelans is very disillusioned. They've lived through this horrible decade of, you know, disastrous economic policies and depression, and they're desperate for some kind of change. And I think that a lot of those people, you know, I don't know that it's possible to say ideologically where they stand. I think that what they need is somebody who can actually offer them more than just, let's get rid of this guy, let's build something new here.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. William Neuman, you can read his book, Things Are Never So Bad That They Can't Get Worse Inside the Collapse of Venezuela. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks very much.
All right, folks, we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will be joined by Summer Lee, candidate in Pennsylvania for Congress. Ooh. We are back, and we are joined now by Summer Lee, candidate for Congress in Pennsylvania's 12th district, parts of Pittsburgh in that area. Summer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, Emma, thanks so much for having me.
I mean, I'm so happy to be talking to you and highlighting candidates like yourself. Congrats on the Sunrise Movement endorsement today.
Oh, yes. So excited about that. We've been picking up a lot of steam. So we've had a good couple of weeks with some folks joining our coalition. So we're so excited and definitely just build out that movement here on the ground.
Yeah, Bernie endorsed you maybe a week ago or something, and you are a Justice Democrat. So and definitely in good company with some of those endorsements for sure. Let's talk a little bit about your race. We've been talking about union busting lawyers in the context of the Supreme Court because Biden was considering nominating Childs, which he did not do. But you're actually facing off against one in your primary race. Talk a little bit about your opponent and what differentiates you from him.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair and to be honest, I actually have a couple of opponents.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
The thing that I'll say first about those guys, I don't know them that well, right? You know, I hear the things that other people hear, right? And their work product exists also, just like mine does. I just know that I've been a candidate and an organizer and just a person, like a community member who has been really strongly in favor of our workers, right? Standing with our workers on picket lines and in protests, right? Standing with them in boardrooms and really I think the center of everything that we do has to be for building power for poor and working class people. And as a poor and working class person, it informed everything that I've done. So I think that that's one thing that definitely sets me apart from my opponents, right? This is lived experience. You know, when we talk about how important it is for our workers to be able to unionize, when we're talking about how important it is that they have rights on the job, right? Paid family, paid sick leave, healthcare. You know, these are things that impact me. They impact my family. They impact my community. They impact my community disproportionately. So that's what's really just driven my approach and our campaign's approach. And I think that it will show. You know, it shows in the coalition that we built. It shows in the amount of unions and workers that have joined us. And I hope that my opponents will also stand with labor.
Yeah. Was that a priority for you in your race? Because I mean, I think that that's really a hallmark of how a lot of left-wing candidates are gaining traction and finding success is embracing labor. Was that something that you wanted to put at the forefront of your campaign?
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, it's the why, right? I think that when we're looking at just the systemic inequalities that we face in this country, you know, left candidates, progressive lefties, right? We're not just embracing labor because it's like an in vogue thing to do, or it's the thing that is good for branding. You know, I think that we truly understand to our core how integral like that labor piece is to our movement. I know that if we're fighting for Medicare for all or a Green New Deal, right, or housing justice, you know, a living wage, all of these things that we need right now, right, that we deserve and that we're fighting for, I know that the way that we win that will only come through a robust labor movement. It will only come through embracing our workers, centering our workers, right, expanding that electorate base, you know, through this poor and working class coalition. So I think I know that that's why I do, and I believe that that's why progressives are right in our framing of that, and we're right to really center that in all of our platform.
I agree. I mean, and I think that that's a part of an important piece of your campaign, but it's indicative of your policy objectives as well. Green New Deal, canceling student debt, Medicare for all, as you say. So all of the things that us on the left are really focused on as goals, policy wise. But you know, I also wanted to talk a little bit about your experience in the Pennsylvania State House as well, because the Pennsylvania legislature was in the news after the 2020 election, and it seems like you have some pretty aggressive Republicans that are your colleagues. If you were to make it to Congress, you'd have to deal with the Republican Party on the national level as well. What has been your experience being in the Pennsylvania legislature, and how would you extrapolate that or use that if you were to win and represent Pennsylvania's 12th district in Congress?
Yeah, my word. I have had the distinct pleasure of being able, or I will say having to work with the Republicans for the last 3 years and a half. It's absolutely been an experience. You know, I always, you mentioned, after the election of 2020, and after, the insurrection, Pennsylvania had more folks than any other place. And a number of them were my colleagues who were there insurrection, who were egging it on, right, who have been fundraising off of it. And their bills reflect that value, right? It reflects those values. Everything that they do reflects this radicalism, right? It reflects that white supremacy, that xenophobia. And I think that having dealt with it in Pennsylvania, I know that there is no place that we're going to get a more extreme version of this. Now, there are some legislatures that don't have that same safety net that we do in a Democratic governor.
Right.
But there is nothing that would be keeping us from being Florida, from being Texas, and our laws. So I know, and I have more experience than any of these folks recognizing that nostalgia that we have for bipartisanship is a mischaracterization. I think it's a very unproductive framing of how we're going to win forward. The reality is,
you know what you're dealing with. I mean, like, just give us a sense of I mean, it's again, the president is they fetishize bipartisanship and working together, but there is I feel like little they haven't updated their software for 40 years. That's what it's like, right? That you get what the Republicans are like and what they're like on the state level, because that's just going to trickle upwards. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
just talk about, I mean, in the wake of the 2020 election, what did you see from your Republican colleagues in terms of their belief in or lack of belief in democracy, and honestly, their fascist tendencies?
Yep. We've been auditing the election since then, right?
Yeah.
We're still like auditing the election, still challenging the election results. So Pennsylvania led the charge. Our Pennsylvania legislature, with taxpayer dollars, right, led the charge to spread falsehoods that there was some sort of fraud during this election, that those results were not legitimate. There was that, right? Ever since COVID, right? As we've been fighting for paid family leave, we've been fighting for hazard pay, for PPE, for healthcare, for housing justice, right in the middle of a pandemic, right? They've been fighting for constitutional protections that would say that we don't need vaccines at all, right? They've been fighting to make sure that the governor doesn't have any powers at all, because that has been the one kind of thing standing in their way from having absolute power in Pennsylvania.
Right.
That's what they've taught. That's what they've spent their time and their effort doing it. You know, I always mention, like, as a Black woman, right? Not just as someone who comes from a working class background, you know, from a poor community, divested, and as a Black woman, you know, that bipartisanship or that civility that they're hearkening to, they're always talking about a time period when we weren't there. There weren't Black people there. There weren't women there, right? There weren't folks from refugee backgrounds there. So it was much easier for Democrats and Republicans to work together. They just put that one thing aside. I remember when we were celebrating a colleague or mourning a colleague, one or the other, like, but a colleague had come up, or an old colleague, someone who had worked there, and people were clapping and standing up, and three people walked up to me and was like, "Don't clap." That person was like almost certainly in the KKK.
Yeah.
Right. And those are the people who folks would ask us to just work better with, right? Just try harder, just reach across the aisle to be with them.
Yeah, it's just that's this kind of obsession with our institutional processes. It's like a religious obsession, and the reality is that they were tools to uphold white supremacy, and they are tools to uphold white supremacy. And I think that. Yeah, right. I mean, and I think that's just such an important point that you're making there, because the nostalgia is dangerous in that way. So I guess, like, talk a little bit more about your platform. Medicare for all, you support. Green New Deal, that you support. There, you also talk on your website about supporting reproductive rights. This is an unprecedented assault on abortion rights in this country, and the Republican Party and conservative groups see this as a massive opportunity. What would you do in Congress in order to help protect a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to her own body? And honestly, what are you seeing as a member of the Pennsylvania State Legislature in terms of the initiatives on the ground?
Yeah. You know, reproductive health, I think, like a lot of other topics that, you know, are in my platform and progressive platforms, right, that we have been fighting for on the left. I think that one of the biggest barriers to winning on them is that lack of intersectionality, right? It's that lack of solidarity with who we're centering and who we're fighting for. Reproductive health is a prime example of that. So even as we're fighting for reproductive health, it oftentimes feels like, or is led by white women, right? And it doesn't often center the particular
white feminists, right? The bane of our existence. Yes,
to it, right? That doesn't quite understand the unique kind of needs that Black women and femmes and mothering and birthing people would have, right? That trans folks might have in this process. The Black maternal mortality rate is absurd in my city, right, and in our country as a whole. But as we talk about reproductive health, we don't have enough people talking about the fact that we would make a woman give birth, but we can't guarantee that we can keep a Black woman alive in the process. And there's just not enough advocacy around that. There's not enough connecting those dots in this issue. And I think that my focus is always on how do we expand that, bring that perspective, right? How do we make sure that everybody is coming to this from every single angle that we should, so that we're not leaving out folks who would otherwise be fighting with us, right? And who we should otherwise be fighting for. And that's what I've done at the state level. That's what we've had to do at the state level, because there aren't trans folks in office or more queer folks. There aren't disabled folks. There aren't Black women in office.
Yeah. And that is why it's not just it's representation it's not just representation, it is just building power. That's why that is so important. And I appreciate your emphasis there. So, Summer, tell us a little bit more about your race, when it is, how people can help, how people can get involved in supporting you and your campaign.
Thank you for asking. I
Sure.
running here in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania, and I believe that this race is one of the biggest opportunities we have on the left in the country, right? After Texas, where we got big victories and we are about to get, I hope, another big one. But I believe that this is the next big opportunity that we have. Empty seat. So it's an open seat for the first time in 26 years, right? We have a movement that we've already built around Pittsburgh, right? When I got in 2018, we've just been building ever since that. We've never stopped. So we've been expanding the electorate, expanding that base, bringing people in who had never seen folks like them or heard folks like them running for office and knocking on their doors. So I believe we've been building a huge coalition. Election day is on May 17th. We finally have an actual date in maps.
Nice.
It took very long to get those, right? So we have them. It's May 17th. We will have early voting again, right? Even though the Republicans, you asked what they do, they went to the courts to get their own law repealed so that we couldn't vote by mail. But the Supreme Court has halted that. We can do that, right? So our college students, our seniors, our disabled folks will be able to vote early. So we have a huge opportunity here. And we have been building a coalition that includes not just Bernie Sanders or Ayanna Pressley or JD or Sunrise. We have environmental organizations, all the progressive organizations. We have local electeds, city and county electeds, and statewide electeds. We have enough folks to reach the field, but we just got to grow. So we're going to knock doors. We need y'all to follow us. Follow me on Summer for PA on Twitter, Summer for PA on our website, MRLive for Congress on Instagram. That's how you can keep track of everything that we're doing. You can plug in. We will keep you up to date. You can call from us. If you're not in Pittsburgh, you can call and you can send text with us. We will definitely plug you in. You can donate. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, but financial filing period is coming.
Okay, got you. Well, I mean, any way people can help. Summer for PA, go to MRLive's website and chip in if you can. Help volunteer, door knock, etc. Summer, final question: is the black and yellow on purpose?
We are. It is. This is the Still City. It is our favorite color. So it's cute. It's a good color palette. Like doesn't the yellow nice on the black?
No, I mean I appreciate that it's the one of the few cities I can think of where it's like three major sports teams. They're all color coordinated, and that is I wish we had a little bit more of that here in New York. But I really appreciate it, Summer. Thanks so much for your time today, and go check out Summer for PA, and support her campaign. Thanks so much.
Thank y'all.
All right, folks. With that said, we are going to head into the fun half. But first, do we have Binder and
Yeah,
Brandon?
they'll probably need to filter in at this moment now if they want.
Yes. Well, what happened on Left Reckoning last night, Matt?
So last night we had Nick Bolin on to talk about why Democrats are losing rural America. We also had some good contributions from Kowalski on that in the post game, but. A very rural tinged night last night because I saw Jacobin also did a very similar slate of shows with I think different guests. But I also talked about how Sturgis, when in the early 90s they were having trouble with the motorcycle rally in Sturgis, being too pornographic and drunk, that they decided that the solution for that was to privatize it. Because they were high on that Reagan, or drunk off that Reagan Kool-Aid, and so they created Sturgis Rallies and Races Incorporated, and gave them control of the rallies. And what they did was sell a whole bunch of more liquor licenses and start things like wet T-shirt contests, to the point where we have the Sturgis Rally during COVID, where
they thought it was too pornographic, so they started a wet T-shirt contest.
Well, look, you give it into a corporation, and it turns out that they don't actually just want to do like the nice social sort of initiatives that a community wants. They instead want to maximize profit. Go figure.
Wow.
And that's what they did. And fast forward to the COVID-19, where a bunch of Sturgis residents didn't want the rally to happen because of there being a giant pandemic around that's killing up to 1 million Americans now. And it turned out that Sturgis Rallies and Races Incorporated and Governor Kristi Noem said, actually, that decision isn't yours. You privatized that, and so we're going to do the rally anyway. So we talked about that in the post game. So very rural show last night. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to that.
And speaking of rural as a topic, check out Nick Hanauer's piece in the
Hanauer?
Prospect. Yeah, is that how you say it?
I think so. Yeah.
Democrats need to fix rural economies and get credit for it because
I mean that's sort of what we touched on. Is,
Yeah.
And the solution isn't like it's so over mystified by frankly capitalists, because look at a place like Wisconsin, for instance. You have a few different sectors of the economy. You have rural ag. You also have urban environments, and you have a sort of recreational seasonal employment. All of those groups would benefit from something like single payer healthcare. And instead we did this Obamacare stuff that everybody hates.
Yeah.
And it does it delivers material support for people, but not the political winner that say single payer would be.
No, for sure not. But with that said, we have Binder and soon. All right. We'll see
You
how
can
it goes.
kind of see our
There we go.
Ooh,
it's
what's
not
with the
pointed
new
towards
camera
me, right?
setup?
Because I'm doing that thing where I take my shoes off when Sam's not in the office. Although I did it I like sitting cross-legged. That's the thing about me. I like not using the non-PC term, but I like sitting like right.
Yeah, I think chairs are overrated. I mean, I was watching some
Hard to do that
anime,
with your shoes.
and like and maybe this is stereotypical, but I feel like the thing of in like I think Japan, where you sort of are cross-legged on the floor for meals and stuff like that.
Oh, it's great.
Seems awesome.
Yeah, it's probably good for your back too. But anyway, what's up, Binder? How
What's
are
with the
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I can't believe the audience is look at it's Bradley. And they're seeing how the office is so messy. But anyway, what's
Is
up,
this
Binder?
new?
How are you?
Is this camera new? Do you guys just set this up?
Yes, it's new. Yeah.
Ooh, I like how you can see some sort of very large. What is that at the top of the screen there? It's some sort of pole.
It's like
front and
it's the rig for the cameras that is no longer in use, but still up there.
Looks good. It looks very very real. Let's put it that way. Very real.
Yes.
It's exactly different furniture, but exactly the office I remember.
How you doing? What's happening over on Doomed and Scam Economy?
I'm doing good, and thank you for remembering the name of the show. On Doomed on Tuesday, I talked with Stephen Monicelli of Protein Magazine and Protein Magazine. I have one of those things where I see a word, I never hear it said, and then I just make up my own pronunciation. But
Nice.
he basically he did something that Sam Seder could not. He debated Steven Crowder for real. He showed up at a college campus where Steven Crowder was, and he got in front of Steven Crowder for like 15 minutes to discuss Steven Crowder's most pressing topic of the day, which is obviously trans women playing in women's sports. And
Steven
it
Crowder,
was
famous
Christ.
sports fan,
Right.
who knows
Yes,
a lot about
big-
sports.
Yeah,
especially-
what'd you play? 5 years?
especially women's on the college level swimming. He's a big fan of that, long time.
That would have been a
very
good
pressing issue.
question. Is can you name like several women swimmers, please?
Right. So he came on. Steven came on the show to talk to me about that, and he actually had written previously about these two right-wing twins who are behind this like anti-trans hate campaign going on in college campuses in Texas, and they're the ones who had invited Steven Crowder. So we got into his discussion, his debate with Crowder, his coverage of those two right-wingers who have been basically fomenting this hate in Texas. Very interesting episode. Check it out, doomedcast.com and at youtube.com/Matt Binder. And then tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time, I will be talking with Amy Castor, who is basically an ape expert. And no, I don't mean monkeys and gorillas. I mean the Bored Ape Yacht Club. We will be diving deep into what this whole NFT project that has taken celebrities who are not disclosing the payments they've received for these things by storm. Oh, and that's at scameconomy.com. And of course, youtube.com/Mapinder.
We lost Brandon.
I could keep promoting. I could keep going.
He's back. There he is. Hey, Brandon. We can't hear you.
I was saying you couldn't hear me, but I am back. Thank you. I couldn't get myself
There you are.
I couldn't get myself centered.
What's happening over on the discourse, and then we will head into the fun half real quick.
Oh, well, we should have an episode for everybody after the live show this weekend. So,
Oh, yeah, I know. This will be my first time meeting Binder in person. Isn't that weird?
That will be right. This Saturday.
You met Brandon?
Right. Wow.
I've met Brandon. I mean, Brandon came in here.
Oh, yeah, that's
the
right.
Studio. Yeah.
I'm a polite person. I come in, I bring a gift,
Yes.
That's right.
You brought a lot of cookies, and I think that resulted in like a 10-pound
great
weight
Christmas.
gain for me.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was trying to think on the positive side, but
Well, they were amazing. I gave them out at I gave them out at Christmas to some family members, and at first I tried to pass it off as my own, but then I had like a glass of wine and I revealed that they were yours. But
I think this when I meet you on Saturday, I think this is that you're gonna be like the person who I've had interaction with online for like the longest, who I didn't already know in real life to begin with.
It's crazy. It's so bizarre, but it'll be great. Looking forward to seeing you guys. But let's head into the fun half. 646-257-3920. We'll be taking a few calls, I think, but we have a lot of clips to get to, so we're gonna get to that. See you then. There.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports.
We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-3501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
654 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of
But let me say this. Poop.
You call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Are back.
We are back.
Hello,
Something's going on in
everybody.
the background. There's Brandon.
Oh no!
Oh,
man
no.
down. Man down.
What was that?
Oh, if everything's okay there.
We're back.
That's all right. We got.
What did I
Brandon and
miss?
in the-
Yeah, Brandon's camera turned over and it revealed that he keeps it on top of a stack of books.
I told you that already. I told you
I
it was
didn't know
unstoppable.
that.
The
I was.
confirmation was dramatic though.
We only knew about it in the abstract.
I like to be open with my fans and audience. Any questions you have about me, I'm ready to open up about.
Oh well. What's your social security number?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not good with long strings of numbers.
Bank pin.
See, again, long string of numbers.
I just watched the video replay of your camera falling over on YouTube. It was very funny.
Top 10 streaming anime betrayals. Brandon's camera versus his knee hitting the table that his camera is perched upon.
I mean, to be fair, your Thursday appearance was very last minute. It's the first time you've been on this program. No time to go out and actually get a stand that would make your weekly appearance easier.
So we could dig into that, but I think it'd be a waste of the people's time.
You're always just looking out for the people. Brandon.
Always for people.
All right, let's take a call. Calling from a 308 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it is Kowalski.
Hey, Kowalski.
Just wanted to give you compliments on the good candidate interview. I must say I am extraordinarily jealous of the options other people get to
right.
choose from.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to give you guys a quick ag update. I touched on it slightly last week in an IM, but things are looking actually somewhat positive. It looks like the rain we got will probably get us through planting, so there won't be any issues there. Prices have been relatively stable for about 2 weeks straight now. So a lot of that uncertainty is out. We're still going to see drought pressures, but it all looks like it's going to be accounted for. The two things we really need to hope for right now is either the U.S. subsidizes food exports to whatever areas are going to be impacted, and that we do not diminish the SNAP program whatsoever. That could actually just improve things for everyone. Higher prices now, while there's higher inputs for farmers, would keep them happy, and then, subsidize poorer folks who need food, because, God forbid we charge people an arm and a leg for a necessity.
Right.
But yeah, other than that, there does appear to be some thin ray of light on the horizon. So.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thanks so much, Kowalski.
Yep, and have fun at your live show.
We will.
Thanks, Aaron.
Later.
Bye.
I would imagine that it'll be different from when I did Michael's live show, where we had like several beers before going on stage.
You think it's gonna be different?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how
It's
Sam's going to
earlier.
approach it. Yeah.
That's what I was saying.
Michael's
It's a little
show.
early.
Yeah, right.
But that free green room beer,
It's just
tastes a
there.
little bit better.
It's just sitting there. Dave from Jamaica said, normally I'm not too hard on guests, but today's guest was making a lot of claims and not giving very concrete examples. Also, R.I.P. Ren Goku. Yeah, I was a little nervous about the situation, the guest, but I hear what you're saying, Dave. It was I still think there were some insights that were helpful, but I just
I think I would generally say I'd generally be more sympathetic to Chavismo, and when I see, like, first of all, I'm skeptical of anti-corruption politics, particularly when it's a left-wing movement. But I do think there's criticisms to be made about like from a left perspective. But the ultimate concern is in the context of things like sanctions. Are those criticisms is emphasizing those criticisms crowding out what's a needed sort of solidarity in opposition to like American
Yes.
like, coup mongering.
That's
and
why
that
I
sort of
tried to not be combative, but emphasize the things that I want to get to emphasize. So I hope you thought I did an okay job doing that, but we're never going to fully align with all of our guests. That's just
And
kind of the situation.
the point of having this fun half period where people can respond is that's one of the uses of this show. So
Yes.
if people want to offer further perspective of say Chavez or Maduro, even the IM and phone number. I can't say them off the top of my head though.
And Kowalski also IM'd in Howdy Millennial Majority Report. Great or Matt, I enjoyed your show this week. A bit misogynistic. No, I won't explain. Lesser Matt, your show was a bit better. Brandon, your shirt will be soon in the possession of Majority Report, and Bradley was responsible to get it to you. So, Brandon, don't worry. Bradley has a shirt for you from Kowalski.
I'm on it.
Wait, did this person just reveal who they consider to be Greater Matt and Lesser Matt? Because I don't.
Did you have a misogynistic show? You're gonna.
I mean,
have to...
I don't think so. Perhaps.
I mean, David Griscom and I, we went after Albright and Pelosi, so I think they might be us.
Yeah, I think you're.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be Greater Matt if it helps to even things up.
I'm certainly Greater Emma. Emma, like and Bradley, what is your favorite alcohol of choice? Lastly, great interview. My only options are effing awful. Left is best. My favorite alcohol of choice is I drink red wine, pretty much most red wines, Sauvignon Blanc, white wine, and if for hard stuff, I like gin, and I'll mix in like grapefruit juice or something like that.
Hennessy.
Oh my goodness.
Hennessy and Red Bull, getting tipsy off crunk juice.
Matt.
Mine. I'm not very fancy. I mean, I like Johnny Walker Black, and single malt whiskey sometimes, but typically I'll just drink beers. I like Rollin' Rock. I don't know why. I like the bottle mainly, and Mahu, which is the Madrid beer. I got into that recently, so I don't know if you can even buy it here, but that was cool. And I'm just red wine.
Matt, Binder doesn't drink. Brandon, what's your alcohol of choice?
I am not a big drinker either, actually. I have a pretty low tolerance, and I tend to avoid drinking when I'm bodybuilding or like trying to cut weight. But my drink of choice would be gin. I like gin because it tastes like Christmas.
I like gin
like
too.
The holiday season. It's like a holiday season.
I can't drink vodka, or I have I think I drank too much cheap vodka like freshman year of college, and I really, even if I smell it, I start to feel sick. So
I'm kind of that way with rum, except it's changing. I can start to do rum and cokes again recently.
It's a rite of passage to get that like $20 like handle of vodka that's like plastic. Yeah. Well, I forget what the actual name of it is with like the red sticker, and it's like 14% alcohol.
Yeah, now I'm forgetting exactly what it is. There's like a Russian one too that we would have.
But that people used to have.
Tarkov. I was Stoli. It was for. No, it's not Stoli.
Stoli's the fancier one.
No.
Majorska.
It was Majorska is what I'm thinking.
I never got into vodka. I don't really understand how people think it tastes good.
Me neither. It's
It tastes like I want to clean something.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's get into some clips, if you would like, my friends.
Oh, I forgot to check the sound sheet. You pick something now, and I'll take a look.
Okay, perfect. Let's just start off with Tucker. But there is something particularly for you, Binder, and I'm sure you'll notice it once you see it. Yeah, one of the Booker clips. Okay. So Tucker Carlson has been stoking racial animus towards Ketanji Brown Jackson in the lead up to the confirmation hearings and during the confirmation hearings. Here he is last night with the finale, the grand culmination of all of his racist commentary as her questioning period comes to a close. Tucker Carlson last night on the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson.
As if this country's core institutions have not been degraded or diminished enough with pregnant flight suits and FBI that behaves like Nancy Pelosi's Praetorian Guard. As if that weren't bad enough, Joe Biden announced in January his plan to choose the next Supreme Court justice on the basis of appearance. The Supreme Court. You never thought that would happen. Sociology.
Appearance. On the basis of appearance. This is a way for Tucker Carlson, one, to like trivialize and present having a black person on the court as some sort of just like aesthetic choice, as opposed to one that brings experience and one that has a lot of weight. And he's later in the clip, he's going to talk about gender and appearance. Notice that he doesn't mention the fact that Trump's recent Supreme Court appointment was a woman, and he made that declaration before nominating Amy Coney Barrett. But regardless, continue.
Technology department maybe, your company perhaps, but the Supreme Court really matters. What does appearance have to do with ability or fealty to the Constitution? Joe Biden never explained. He did indicate, to be fair, that he would prefer a lawyer for the job, maybe even a clever one, but mostly he said he wanted a black woman, genetics being the single most important factor in what we used to call judicial temperament. How does that work exactly? How do genes determine your ability as a Supreme Court justice
Okay,
or a
pause it
surgeon
again.
or an airline?
This is again his dipping his toe into eugenics, or not but like basically attributing race to genealogy, and that's just another way to just steer people towards Charles Murray racism.
As if we're going after genes right now, and like not using this as a proxy for a background and perspective.
Right.
Pilot or anything else? We would love to hear Joe Biden explain that, but he didn't. Instead, he embarked on a predictably short nationwide search for such a candidate and located in the end a person called Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her confirmation hearings continue today for the second day. Not surprisingly, given how she got this job, most of the talk in Washington was not about what she's done, how she thinks, what she's like as a person, but instead about how she looks. It's not shallow or anything. Here's the shallowest of all, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey.
I could not stop being just joyous that you were sitting in my office.
Is there any...
Oh, sorry.
Never had this moment before.
I grew up in a small black church. No, you didn't. Another lecture about the black experience from a blue-eyed Yale graduate who in fact grew up in an all-white town, the son of IBM executives. Is there anyone on this planet phonier than Cory Booker? To her credit, Ketanji Brown Jackson doesn't seem quite so fraudulent. That would be impossible. But she does, and this is the key, share a resume that is strikingly similar to Cory Booker's. Daughter of academics, graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, on the board of the single wokest day school in Washington, D.C., et cetera, et cetera. You know exactly how that story turns out. Because in the end, when they tell you you're getting a black nominee, they're not talking about the son of a maid and a farm worker from Pinpoint, Georgia. In fact, we already have a Supreme Court justice like that. His name is Clarence Thomas. He is a great man, even if no one in Washington will acknowledge that. No, what they mean when they tell you you're getting a black Supreme Court justice is that you're getting yet another Democratic Party robot with the same rigid and totally predictable views as your average professional class white liberal, but who happens to be tanner than Joe Biden. So identical to everyone else in power, just a different shade.
All right, so there are a few things happening here. One, he's reducing race to some sort of like aesthetic quality, like akin to if you're a model or if you're a person who, I don't know.
I only nominate cool people to the Supreme Court,
Right.
backwards cap wearers only.
Right. If you wear a leather jacket, you're in. And two, I can't decide how he feels about some of these credentials. AOC is a bartender, so she's unqualified to be a member of Congress. But because Ketanji Brown Jackson's parents were educated in the way and had all the credentials that he says AOC doesn't have, which makes her unqualified, or in terms of her background, to be a member of Congress. Those are used as a way to cast aspersions on KBJ.
I like how his ultimate argument was that she and also Cory Booker are not black enough.
Yeah.
That, that they're, basically that they're Oreos. And, it's funny because like, you're right. Like, what is the qualification that would make it okay to nominate them to, or nominate her to the Supreme Court? It seems to be kind of a mixed bag. Like, if it's going to be a black person, it has to be, well, Republican would be helpful, but Clarence Thomas has to fit this kind of very specific stereotype of a black person in his mind, like pulling himself up from his bootstraps to see that he is in fact Republican. But, I think ultimately his point is well taken, I guess, or you know, you can argue that like that is the reason why he used the word appearance and not race to begin with, because his overall argument is that she simply appears to be black, but the things that he would argue makes someone black, like essentially growing up in poverty, is what he's arguing. There's not something that she has experience with. And you know, if we're going to deliver like a leftist critique, you know, frankly, you could deliver a similar one, that this is a way to appeal to a certain type of, you know, liberal, neoliberal politics that, you know, presumes to add diversity simply by diversity of, you know, gender, diversity of race, without any kind of like diversity of experience that goes along with those things usually, but using those identity factors as like a stand-in for the experience that one would most likely have as a member of the black race or a member of an oppressed class. But you know, I can only imagine his other coverage was that she was simply too black before this part. You know, it's a very funny. I love Tucker Carlson's show, because Tucker Carlson is like the ultimate what's the word? Arbiter on blackness.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, Tucker.
It's the bow tie. That made him.
He's retired that. Please.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, Tucker's a guy who, him and his staff they like to mimic a sort of leftish sounding like class politics in moments like this, where they want to like sort of like smuggle in like when they're really just being racist. But of course, like there's no real like those sorts of class concerns, he forgets those immediately. And when he talks about someone like Ilhan Omar, for instance, and then it's about how she wants to hate America and how we have a right to preserve our heritage.
Well, I mean, those sorts of class concerns are just, as people have pointed out when they're talking about like the acceptance rate for places like Harvard, they are a form of affirmative action. And we could talk about why the fact that the majority of our politicians do have a very, very similar resume, even if that resume starts when they get to like college and grad school and they're going to the same schools, et cetera. But that's not the kind of affirmative action that they're interested in, because that's just the normal way things are supposed to work, because it's been mapped onto like a fake meritocracy. The kind of affirmative action that people are actually, you know, people like Tucker Carlson are actually interested in like heightening up and exposing as like the bad kind, is the kind where, you know, somebody from that same world who happens to be a person of color or LGBTQ, you know, gets a job that in their mind was supposed to belong to like a white man.
Yep.
This isn't a sociology department at Howard University. This is the Supreme Court. It's important.
Yeah.
According to Carlson.
Let's I want to, before I forget to do this, I want to do this the Joe Rogan clip. So Joe Rogan has, I think, appealed to certain audiences, certain right-wing audiences, with his anti-vax misinformation, but also with his transphobia. This has been a theme throughout his career, and it's just kind of ramped up more recently because it's become such a wedge issue for Republicans, and they're being fairly aggressive about it. Here he is talking to, who is he speaking with here? Do we know?
Mike Baker. He's a former CIA guy.
Great.
Great.
Yeah, your typical comedy podcast.
Right. Yeah, I know. What happened to the deep state stuff? He's talking about the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, and he starts off making a point where I'm like, okay, this is not going to be that bad, but look at where he takes it. He uses this opportunity to make a distinction between supporting gay rights and the crazy lefty supporting trans rights, and why that's a little bit out there. But supporting gay rights, that's perfectly acceptable. And he's essentially defending the Don't Say Gay bill and thinks that the framing of calling it Don't Say Gay is very unfair to the substance of the legislation.
I had a conversation with someone the other day, and she was like, I would be down with Republicans if they would just drop all the gay shit. She was like, all that gay stuff, like, leave those fucking gay people alone. Like, it's one of the dumbest aspects of hardcore conservatives.
Yeah,
that they
absolutely.
That they deny gay rights. And
they do it for the same reason they denied the existence of trans people. More
right.
Anyway, sorry.
No, I think you're probably not alone. I think there's probably a lot of people that feel that way. There's a lot of people that are in the center on whether it's from left-wing issues or right-wing issues. With left-wing issues, maybe it's trans women in sports, or maybe it's gender confirmation. It's like this "don't say gay" thing in Florida. When I heard that, I was like, "What? What are they saying? You can't say gay? Is that really what's going on?"
Is
It turns out that's not what it is.
Yeah.
It's not what it is
Yeah.
at all. What it
Yeah.
is ages. It's 1st through 3rd grade. They're saying you're not supposed to talk about sexual orientation, gender orientation, or sexual proclivity, or what you're
Yeah.
interested in.
Yeah.
They said you should just teach math and science and history to little kids.
Pause
Yeah,
it.
just let the
don't-
toddlers be.
This bar, so say if there is a child who has 2 gay parents, for example, the teacher is barred from having a discussion about that.
Yeah, enforced euphemisms. You got to talk about like birds and bees and like mother goose or some shit, and be poetic about it. And like this is just enforced infantilism because of religious fundamentalism.
Yeah,
Like,
and
the idea that you have to be this precious about children with sex, and it sucks that schools have to be a place where like the main force maybe, but kids do not get good sex education from their homes, and actually being properly educated in sex. And you can leave this to the experts about the ages on that. I don't have kids, I'm not an expert on this, but the important thing to recognize about sex education for small children is that it helps them understand what is unwanted as well. So it's a protection against child abuse to teach them about this stuff, and keeping them cloistered is frankly closer to grooming than anything that they're talking about.
right, but and that's an excellent point. But also what this precludes is talking about gay parents in general and sexuality in terms of like maybe a family looks a little bit different for you, and so it further stigmatizes children, but he's downplaying it. Let's hear what else he has to say, and then we can all weigh in a bit more.
Interested in.
Yeah.
They said you should just teach math and science and history to little kids.
Yeah,
And
just let the
don't-
toddlers be toddlers,
Yeah.
and then you can start ramping up your.
Pause it for a second. Pause it. I'm sorry. I have a child who's in 1st grade. He's not a toddler. He comes home talking about a lot of things. Last year, before 1st grade, in kindergarten, he learned about Abraham Lincoln getting his brains blown out in the theater. I mean, come on. This is ridiculous that these are yes, they're very young children. There's ways to tell them. Obviously, they use the word assassinated with Lincoln. Still, it was pretty. I mean, he came home and told me, "Oh, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated." I was like, "Whoa, you're learning that in kindergarten? That's pretty. That's pretty interesting." But I'm happy you're learning it. It's these are not like I have a 2-year-old too. I don't expect her to know about Abraham Lincoln or kids sexual orientations or things like that, because she's 2 and doesn't even understand the very concept of it. My son does. He knows the difference between boys and girls very much so, I can tell you, whereas my 2-year-old, it doesn't even occur to her.
Also, we don't, as the critical race theory, or rather the anti-critical race theory push has shown, they don't want us to teach history in this country either. So, really, we're kind of down to even fewer subjects. We're like talking about maybe teaching math and science, sort of, because we've gotten rid of all the other ones or just made them like more heavily propagandized. So
Yeah, just stick them in front of the TV with Veggie Tales. Why do they need education anyway?
you put
Might
a
be
Bible in one
grooming them.
hand, put a Bible in one hand and an NRA pamphlet in the other, and just, send them off to math class.
Yeah, and let the priest babysit him. Sorry.
Woo! Keep going.
It's
instruction.
And people are opposed to that. But it's like, listen, your teachers are not supposed to be the people that explain gender to a fucking 7-year-old.
Yeah.
It's just
You have kids,
Again, I'm
Joe.
sorry, man. Like, actually, in certain cases, we need public teachers because the kids have don't have the their parents aren't able to do that for them.
And they're going to come to their own conclusions, which like partly is fine, but it's just like he has kids at 7 years old. Does he not understand like basic that they can? This is also just such a lack of respect for the agency and the perceptiveness of children at this age.
And it's because they
I mean, and
can't give their- I just want to say real quickly,
think-
it's because they can't
Yeah,
get
go
away
ahead.
with saying like I just want them to support abstinence-only sex education because like that's what the Christian fundamentalists who I'm really speaking for right now want, because we know that that's bad and leads to horrible outcomes. Like the reason you have public school doing this stuff is because it actually is it's a service for folks, and like it'd be nice if all parents were prepared to have full discussions that prepare their kids for the reality of this stuff, but they're not.
Yeah.
Right, and it's
I mean-
also what he's talking about there too now isn't just like sexual orientation in terms of like, typically a cisgender boy is attracted to a cisgender girl and vice versa. He's now talking about like gender, and kids of all ages interact with that sort of thing every single day just by playing with toys that are considered boys' toys, like action figures, or toys that, like, if a boy goes over and plays in the little kitchen set, oh, that's a girl's toy. You'll hear their parents say sometimes, go play. No, this is something that they experience every day, and I think that's an important thing for teachers to discuss. Well, you know what, it's totally fine for you, and first of all, these toys shouldn't be gendered, first of all, and second of all, it's totally fine for you to play with that or experiment with that toy or that that doll if you're a boy, if you want to. No problem with that.
But they don't want that. They want those.
right,
They want those things naturalized.
Yes, exactly.
Because then it becomes a masculine and a feminine thing too. Like, oh, that's hurting masculinity in the boys and the femininity in the girls, and that's where it all pretty much grows into.
It's we're being anti-indoctrination when we say that boys should play with blue toys exclusively and girls should play with pink toys exclusively, and anything that deviates from that or acts or questions that at all, that's indoctrination.
Yeah, I mean, you are just being a complete heathen right now, anti-God.
Well, and I mean, I think this is just a fundamental disagreement between like, the progressive theory of education versus what like right wingers pretend their, position on education is. That like education is about curriculum only learning in the sense that we should be teaching math and history and only facts and only science and that stuff. And everything else is, for your parents to teach you, etc. Where it's like, no, I think we've understood for a long time as a country that school is a place where kids are socialized. They, as children learn to understand and like exist in a world that is theoretically they should be, if we were in such a segregated country, learning to exist in a world that's more diverse than they would have otherwise experienced if they were experiencing sort of like the kind of education system we had when only the wealthiest people could afford to send their kids to like a private school. And, these people are afraid of something very acutely terrifying to them, that this stuff is just going to become normal. Like they don't view their own indoctrination as indoctrination. It's just normal. And their fear is that if you teach kids that this stuff is normal, that it's normal to have two mommies, it's normal to have a mommy, or rather a mommy who becomes a daddy, that they won't be as like open to the Republican political machine as they would be otherwise. Because, they're talking about like, rather the person he's talking about who would theoretically be interested in Republican politics, if not for the anti-gay stuff as sort of, anti-gay as just a general, I guess, umbrella of like their bigotry. Like, who is this person? Because ultimately, like, that's all they have really. It's like, what is those Republicans for except for like the bigotry with a really thin veil of like pro-business talking points that the Democrats use too. Like, that's really their sole kind of distinction between those two parties for the most part.
Let's finish. I want to hear what he has to say, because he's trying to say one kind of bigotry is okay and another kind is like is not okay, but it's actually not what the Republicans are doing. That's really the crux of it. I think.
And this is why it's a problem for people like Dave Rubin and himself, who are basically crypto reactionaries. And often, maybe Joe isn't, but he certainly books guests.
At the very least, he's an idiot.
And who are these teachers, and how do you know what their perspective is? Are they intelligent about it? Are they trying to,
again, this could be an argument against sex education in schools,
to indoctrinate the child to any particular point of view, whether it's pro-transgender or anti-transgender or anti-gay or pro-gay? They shouldn't have any say
Pause it there.
when you're talking.
He's making it. He's making it seem like the pro-transgender and anti-transgender thing is like a kid walks away saying, I'm going to be transgender now, or I'm not going to be transgender now, or the same with I'm going to be gay now based on what I learned in class. That's not what this is at all. That's just not what this is at all. No kid is listening, getting an education about what a trans person is and what like gender dysphoria is, and going, oh, that's me now, unless they already were experiencing those things and just didn't know what it was.
Right, but
There's
they want that, they want those instincts, or they want the thought of a child that I might be trans. They want that both suppressed, and they also want it stigmatized, and that's what not talking about it does. But
what they say though, that's not what they say though. They're trying to sell to parents that your kid who was never feeling like they were transgender person is going to be educated in that class and walk away saying, "Oh, now I'm trans, I guess."
Right.
A 7-year-old kid. I mean, I feel like that is the job of the parents.
Yeah.
That's the job. I mean,
and you hope the parents are doing it, but
when kids get older, and
again, I just can't get over how much like this guy's success is that he's basically a Republican often, but just like does cool shit, like is cool with drugs and wrestling.
Yeah, and
like, this is just like Phyllis Schlafly.
Right.
They develop feelings for either the same sex or opposite sex, or they feel like they're in the wrong body. Then these conversations should be had by qualified people that can discuss this from a nuanced perspective and understand what the.
Joe Rogan would only listen to people who are experts in their particular field and have qualifications to comment on them, right? All right, keep going. I just want to get through this because if he ever actually lands on something, fucking concrete here, then maybe we'll see. But how much left do we have? 20 seconds.
Psychology of a young person who's trying to figure out who they are in the world is. But the idea that this is don't say gay, because you're saying that ages first grade to third grade, that you shouldn't be bringing up these subjects to them. I mean, I think a lot of people are saying, no, I just don't want you grooming my kids for whatever your ideology.
There we go.
There we
right-wing
go.
ideology or a
There we
left-wing
go.
ideology. I want you to teach them fucking science.
Yeah, there's a
Teach 'em math.
responsibility.
There we go. There you go. So that's just Republican talking points. Garbage. Just because you have a roid gut and you were on Fear Factor doesn't actually mean that you are in any way distinguishable in terms of the perspective that you're providing for people. Like, he's muddying the waters about what this is. One, he starts off this diatribe. Again, I just want to point this out, saying it's really dumb for Republicans to focus on the anti-gay shit. But actually, what they're implementing in Florida is quite reasonable, because it makes sure that your kids are not indoctrinated and you're not being groomed to be trans. And so then what audience are you speaking to there? That's clear. That's clear. And there's really no difference here. Bigotry is bigotry. And Rogan, with his consistent anti-trans commentary, is the one that is denying science. I've said this before on the show. There have been intersex people, there have been non-binary people throughout history. They have just been suppressed. And there is science that backs that up and shows biology that is the case. And he is the one who is denying the science. Rogan would never deny science, right? I mean, like, that is his MO. So it's just...
I think
Go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, I think for Rogan, like, because he doesn't see himself as on the religious side of the argument, same with like a Bill Maher, that he thinks like, religion is a big source of like bigotry, especially anti-gay bigotry. You talk about the Westboro Baptist Church, and where it's just like, Joe Rogan's form of bigotry just seems way more like pervasive in our society, because it's just like typical like juvenile like American teen boy masculinity bigotry. It's like, well, he just probably thinks that like being gay is icky, like the idea of kissing another man is icky, the idea of like these people's minds of accidentally sleeping with a guy because you think they're attractive because they're trans, because it's actually a trans woman and they're a woman, is like it's just disgusting to them. And instead of being able to like deal with their own neuroses, it just becomes like, well, children don't need to know this, because if children learn at an early age that it's normal, then they won't be as grossed out by it as like a 50-year-old man like Joe Rogan is.
Right. I want people to really obviously that was, for a lot of people, I think it was pretty clear when he said grooming where this was going. But I also want to sort of point out that this is a trend right now. The use of that word, you see it way more now than you ever saw before, especially in right-wing circles. It's because they've pinned down something that they think really speaks to the masses. And you know what? I think they're right. I think there are people who are now more in tune to the idea that this stuff could be true because people have been brainwashed by QAnon. Now, really remember, this is the basis of QAnon.
Yeah.
This is the basis of these right-wing conspiracy theories. But then on a more mainstream level, it also speaks to like the Jeff Epstein stuff. And that also really warped people's minds into thinking, oh, now this is something that's happening everywhere. And I remember take it back to Pizzagate even, where there was literally a guy who showed up with a rifle at a pizza place in DC looking for these child sex slaves in a basement that didn't exist. I mean, really understand what's going on here. And it's that the right is basically weaponizing a very real issue with, children being sexually abused, and they're taking it and turning it, and they've figured out that this is the way to win this culture war here. This is the way to win the culture war. The religious stuff, the Christian, what about the children? That wasn't working anymore. What about the children doesn't work, but save the children does. And that's what they're honing in on here, and you're going to see it more and more. And if you sit back and just think, oh, it's just a random culture war thing here, that's what they're going for. I don't think that kids at this age, it should be 1 grade older that they learn about this stuff. Just wait, because they're going to come after the thing that you're into, or and
CRT is this. CRT is this. All of this, save the Josh Hawley's trying to capitalize on this as well. Your children are not safe outside of the home. That's why women have got to go back in the home, and that's why the schools are this hellscape where they're going to be taught all these things that deviate from the norm. It's a huge part of misogyny, and also it's just like tapping into this very visceral thing that is child abuse, and using very cynically using the intense emotions that evokes in order to implement fascism. That's what
I think there's a long history, well said, Emma. There's a long history of those kinds of moral and sex panics in this country related to people's children, related to people, especially as it relates to, gay men being sexual predators in the minds of a lot of Americans, especially relates to the idea of like, well, you can't leave your kids with babysitters because, you should be at home taking care of them in a nuclear family scenario. White flight from the suburb to the suburbs was about like raising your kids in a more safe environment. And we've just, I think, gotten to the point where, there are just more and more mainstream gay people. There are more and more mainstream trans people. We've more or less, especially in our just mass media, accepted LGBTQ people as a, part of our society that need to be respected and protected. That now they have to do, what all cowards do, as the old saying is, like, cowards love hiding behind rules and children. And so they hide behind the children. They hide behind like what it technically says in the Constitution about like, gun laws, because they know that just like that one person who Joe Rogan is theoretically, his friend who would be pro-Republican, if not for the anti-gay shit, they know that like whatever bigotry they have or inside of them that they would love to express is just not socially acceptable anymore. And that's what the canceling argument's about too, that we have to go back to a world where it's socially acceptable to be vocally a bigot and no one can do anything about it, sort of in terms of social stigmas towards you. We have to go to a world where the only kind of affirmative action that anyone is allowed to have is like if they're born rich and have a legacy at Harvard. And, we have to go back to a world where like children are the wards of their parents 100%, and there's nothing that any outside force can do to like interrupt that nuclear family life. And none of that stuff ever really existed, but in their minds, like there is an imagined past where they would have been allowed to be like a bigot but still respected.
And there's no easier way to demean the person who you're opposing than literally just call him a pedophile. You got nothing else, just call him a pedo. That's it.
I prefer just using the more common colloquialism, libertarian, which ultimately just tends to mean the same thing.
There you go.
Let's put it in scare quotes.
No has a good comment in the chat. Says this line of grooming propaganda term was quite effective in the UK as it became an anti-Muslim term for trafficking and sex abuse of children because of some highly publicized cases. Yeah, I do remember that.
And they're using this too with TERFs.
So yeah, this has a long lineage. We should maybe somebody should write a long piece on
This was,
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of stuff, about the idea of like the white slavery moral panic back in the 60s, no, not really the 60s, but like the 70s and 80s. The idea that like people were kidnapping white kids from the suburbs and like selling them into human trafficking, specifically like these kinds of like LGBT like specter groups, like gay men, or what you call it, trans people. That's why, and that's why there are so many
Also, the
Lifetime
movie
movies still.
Taken is about Muslim people doing that, by the way.
Yeah.
But that's just another thing.
But
Anyway, keep
you know,
going.
every Lifetime movie you see is about your like suburban kid being kidnapped, not
Yes.
necessarily by gay or trans people, but that's just like the anxiety that they're tapping into, that they're going to, that that your poor baby Braden is going to be like, like their kindergarten teacher is going to be a trans woman, and then like spirit the kid away to, I don't know, like the global South to make them a communist revolutionary.
We're gonna take one more call because I just looked at the time, and I'm sorry guys, this will be the final call of the day. And then we are gonna just power through some clips because I feel like we need to get to some of that. All right, this will be the final call of the day, calling from a 610 number. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
This is you.
Hey, Emma, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Who's this?
This is D calling from Bethlehem, PA.
D from Bethlehem, PA. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about what do you guys think about the increasing split in the left? Because I've noticed that one common thread has been that the leftists who are always the type to downplay cultural issues are the ones who are like kind of like contrarian on this Ukraine thing. They're the ones who were contrarian on the vaccination issue. So I think actually it was a mistake for the left kind of to assume that we could just have a class-based movement, because people who were not like left on class issues have turned out to be the people who were like the Greenwalds and the Taibbi.
That's why I got to stop you. Like those people aren't representatives of the left. Like
It's just an
Greenwald's
online
a
thing.
libertarian. He's always just been a libertarian.
A lot of libertarians call themselves leftists now because of the dynamic I was talking about earlier with the Republican Party. Like the people who openly identify as libertarian have become like a stigmatized group online. So a lot of people look for like other words to describe themselves that are not libertarian, like, or ANCAP, obviously. So, that's where like labels like that become a little bit inexact, because anyone can just call themselves anything. But over a person's career of like tweets and like articles, you kind of get a feel for what their actual politics are on each individual issue, and then you kind of glean that like, oh, this is just a libertarian, or this is just like a traditional liberal. I think a lot of people have learned to say that they're on the left because that's like the cool thing to say, and it also immunizes you from like a certain questions about your politics.
Also, you said the left made a mistake of just making it all about like the class war. But I also ask you there, what left are you talking about? Because on this show, certainly not. I remember distinctly having discussions with Michael Brooks on this show back in 2014, 2015 about how that's not intersection. You're not being intersectional if you're just talking about the class war, because you're ignoring all the other issues that get involved in that, even from that aspect.
Well, I'm not talking about you guys. You guys
No,
are
of
great,
course,
but
of
I'm
course.
talking about I'm talking about places even like that are respected. Like sometimes I'll see like places like Jacobin, who I think is ostensibly on the left, and there's a focus on really, or like what motivated Trump voters? Was it pure and it's framed as if it was a purely class thing. So
yeah, I don't agree with that analysis.
But I gotta say, I'm more concerned with this idea. Like, I think class does need to be foregrounded, even when you're talking about like issues of identity. I think when you talk about issues of identity, you should make those topics also of class. Like, I think class is like I count me among the people that always thinks that class does need to be inserted in these conversations, not necessarily made the overriding factor, because I do think like that leads to some dumb analysis, absolutely, and there's a whole history of that leading to problems within the left movement. But like I do have a major problem with particularly these guys that are all libertarians, being used as examples of pathologies on the left, because I think a lot of these things are like debatable, and it's a process of struggle that we need to like keep fighting about these things. So I'm a little bit wary of a rush to like condemn the left as too class focused, because I do think like class needs to be included in these conversations.
Right, and in terms of like saying Jacobin, like Jacobin's a magazine that hosts a variety of left perspectives. So it's not. I mean, they had that article on NATO and Ukraine 12 hours before, and then 12 hours later there was an article on that I loved on Russian opposition to the war within Russia. That was like something I totally agreed with. So I mean, I think that those outliers and the class reductionist element gets an over focus because
libs who don't want to talk about class are very anxious about it. That's a bigger problem, I think.
So point well taken, and I'm gonna hang up soon, caller, if you just want to make your final point. D.
And then the other point, because I don't have much time, is do you think that can extend into electoral politics in terms of realizing sometimes even people I agree with will sometimes talk about, this policy polls at 85%, and then we can win if we go on this policy, not realizing that whoever supports the policy, let's just say it's AOC or Nina Turner, is going to have to face, is going to come with the cultural stuff that's going to be a turnoff to voters. So it can't be a pure policy platform, if that makes sense.
What cultural stuff? What are you talking about when you say cultural stuff?
I'm saying sometimes we'll cite 75%. We can win a place like West Virginia because 75% of people in this state support this leftist policy, but they don't realize that the candidate who would run in West Virginia is going to be a Democrat that has, good culture, that has good stances on cultural issues, and those are going to be a non-deal breaker for those voters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
I don't know what a cultural, I don't know what you're talking about when you say a cultural issue.
Like if
you mean they're black?
Yeah, that's what. Either they're black.
And that's like a civil rights issue, though. That's not a
called
cultural,
the urban demographic. That's the proper euphemism.
When you're talking cultural issue, you're talking like I don't know, like a movie like Star Wars was Republicans hated Star Wars or something.
I see what you're saying. I think the thing that we need to worry, I mean, I don't really agree with you in terms of the like demographic point, but the point being that like extrapolating national popularities about policies and not making them specific to the races and the states and the municipalities in which people are running is a fatal flaw, I think, of the left sometimes. But appreciate the call, D. Thank you. We really got to do some clips.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay.
I would just say
the reason I was honing in on that, and I'm not saying the caller, I don't think the caller meant anything by it, but I've seen this a lot. I forgot who it was. Some reporter at a major newspaper basically said, like, I don't get why Democrats don't just give in to the anti-trans stuff and then pick up wins elsewhere. This cultural issue, the focus on the cultural issue stuff is so dumb. And it's just like, no, that's not, trans rights are not a cultural issue.
Oh. All right, Binder froze.
Binder, you want to go, Brandon?
Well, yeah, I was going to kind of echo Matt's point, where I think that one of the issues with the call was saying, but one of the issues with people identifying themselves as leftists, I think it's really easy for people to imagine themselves as being some kind of radical once they find themselves or perceive themselves being implicated by something that previously the political by something in our political system. And so you get a lot of people, as poverty expands in our country, as the middle class shrinks, who find themselves suddenly implicated by like class issues, and suddenly deciding that like being implicated by like class issues, and that the acceptable level of like leftism or progressivism is whatever point includes you, and then everything else becomes a cultural issue, is I think where we find ourselves at, where it's like it's easy for people to imagine that they're even across like the liberal spectrum of like Democrats who are just like run-of-the-mill Democrats, like the shorthand for being a radical Democrat is that they're Black. And because that means there's like, because of their identity and because of the experiences and the way that they're implicated by Blackness, oftentimes they're slightly better about like anti-Black issues or pro-Black issues, I guess in this case. And so, you know, part of being a leftist has to be about a broad philosophy of like how we should treat each other in like global politics and like you know, criminal justice, et cetera, not just like the politics of how you personally make your, you know, sphere of life better, and then everything outside of that is just like, well, that's just like a fringe issue, right? So I think that some people have learned that leftism is a proper vehicle by which they can elevate themselves, and not necessarily like, no, leftism is about a total reconstruction of like society and how we like identify each other.
Yeah.
And with each
All
other, rather.
Let's yeah, I mean, great points as always, Brandon. But let's get
Am
into
I
some
back?
clip. Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Better than
Apparently,
ever.
according to the YouTube chat, it froze on a freeze frame of me doing like that classic meme, the troll face. So I'm looking
screen
forward
grab
to
that.
seeing the still. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the stills.
Yeah, someone will screen grab it. All right, let's Matt, we definitely saved this for you, Binder. Cory Booker, we opened the show with him talking to Ketanji Brown Jackson. But here he is at the Senate committee hearing on regulating cryptocurrency. He loves crypto, it appears. In fact, he thinks it's a democratizing force. So
I want to know who's lobbying him. I want to know what he's holding. I want to know a lot of things now.
Right, exactly, because this is literally just straight out of the language of crypto bros and people who hold a lot of crypto. Wouldn't be shocked if he has some himself. And the argument that he uses here in order to promote cryptocurrency is predictably cynical.
Thank you so much. I believe we have Senator Booker with us virtually. Senator Booker.
Yes, you have me. Thank you very much. This is a really exciting hearing. I want to thank our chairwoman for hosting it. I actually believe there's some urgency that we act in this space. I think that we can create a more sensible regulatory framework.
There's no phrase people like more in like the tech VC world than like this space.
Yeah.
You need to move in this space.
He's gonna say innovation too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Cory Wall Street Booker. I can't imagine he's on. I can't believe he's promoting crypto.
All right.
Been concerned about with technology moving, the lack of government's ability to move at the speed of technology undermines the ability for Americans to apply this technology. I came into the Senate on the Commerce Committee, and I remember the FAA was regulating drones in such a horrible way that other countries like France were using drones for dangerous missions, from fixing poles and wires to doing mining work, where we in the United States.
In other words, clearly practical applications that are demonstrable, and you can see actually what the use is just by looking at it.
As opposed to like covert murders.
Or like compared to like cryptocurrency, which is just speculative assets and like dumb JPEGs tokens.
Also, the technology is not like, it's not new. It's not anything
Oh
spectacular.
no,
Right,
This
yeah.
isn't some
it's
like
actually
innovative thing.
ancient and inefficient.
Like if we're going to talk about technology and he's making the comparison to drones, I mean, a pilotless flying machine that could be controlled from the ground from far away, that's a pretty crazy technology. A database where people are speculating on tokens that are stored in this database, which are basically just characters, numbers and letters. Not really any sort of innovative thing going on there.
That's what's so funny about when they try to compare it to the internet or stuff like this, because it's like, oh yeah, communicating from across the world immediately, that has an immediate utility. This sort of stuff doesn't. It didn't take like that long for even drones, right? Like JFK's older brother died in like what was a sort of like attempt at like a drone type of thing. Like they wanted a drone, but they needed actually one pilot, right? Like, but like this stuff has been desired for decades, and so of course the practical utility was there. And I also think like it's good that the FAA, like I wish the FAA was more democratic, but I think the government should have an ability to say like, hey, Jeff Bezos can't fly drones into your backyard, for instance, that sort of thing.
Of course. Right. All right, keep going.
We're still seeing death rates that could have been avoided with technology, but the FAA was so over-regulating this new technology.
Over-regulating.
And I said to the then chairperson of the FAA that if you were around during the time of Orville and Wilbur Wright, we would have never gotten off the ground. And so
You know how many
naming
people
his own
died
highlight? I
trying to
said
make
this
like
to this
flying
guy.
machines? You know, people
Yeah,
died
no,
trying to make like flying machines too. Like, you know, back in the early days. I mean, you know, what were you saying, Matt?
Well, I actually blanked now. I was listening to you.
Yeah, it's just this technology that churns a ton of electricity and is terrible for the environment and is basically a way for started as a way for drug dealers to hide their money and now is a way for crooks on Wall Street to do pump and dump schemes. It's the same thing as the invention of the airplane.
But also like
Well,
him,
they can't acknowledge us for that stuff though. Like, you know, because
no.
like crypto is still crypto and also NFTs are still like a solution in search of a problem.
Exactly.
Because the only things that they actually solve right now are like how to launder money, you know, untraceably theoretically. But I mean, people are tracing it now.
You know, it's
And
not even very good at that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not even
exactly.
it's not even good for that application.
Like all it's done, it hasn't even really revolutionized scamming. Most scams on cryptocurrencies are just like the oldest scams in the book. You know,
The one area has revolutionized scamming is that previously the scammed could get there. Well, still to this day, the scammed, if you get scammed out of via your credit card or your bank account or credit card company will rule in your favor and get you your money back. If you get scammed via crypto, say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You're not getting that back.
As Trump would say, bye-bye, bye-bye. But Cory Booker has a way that it actually affects racial justice and changes the makeup here in this country. Yep.
Were around during the time of Orville and Wilbur Wright, we would have never gotten off the ground.
Orville.
And so this is one of those cases where we are already seeing some of the hopeful, optimistic possibilities in cryptocurrency. What
are they?
Democratized.
Someone tell me. Can some cryptocurrency advocate who, like Cory Booker, tell me one example of what they are? Because all we ever hear about are these hypothetical, not even a specific hypothetical, just these innovations. This vague
Do you have the Howard
innovation.
Schultz? Do you have the Howard Schultz sound drop? This is what he sounds like.
Well, yeah, I'll get to that later. But yeah, this is going to be a new sound drop. This hopeful, optimistic possibilities. Here it is.
And so this is one of those cases where we are already seeing some of the hopeful, optimistic possibilities in cryptocurrency. It has a democratizing a force. Minorities are overrepresented in using that, and obviously it represent with traditional banking.
You know, press pause for a second. These stats are some of the most bullshit stats, and I've seen some of these surveys. Some of them, by the way, administered via a pro crypto or crypto company that's trying obviously to promote this. These surveys where people like Cory Booker get the idea that there is an they overcount minority groups who are into crypto. And the questions are always something so vague like, have you ever once in your life purchased a Bitcoin or a piece of a Bitcoin, a fraction of a Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency? And they always point out, oh, look, it's like something like 10 to 15 or 20% of like Latinos and Black people are in that group. Never questioning A, how much did they actually put in? B, was it just like being that's how vague that question is? Did a friend just tell them to like check it out and they put like $1 in and then never touched it again and never had any interest in the space again because they realized it was bullshit? Because they could technically in that survey say, yeah, they invested in crypto. They've used crypto before. These numbers, especially when you know who are the people who have made this abundance of wealth in cryptocurrency. It's those early ideological libertarians who got in back when they were actually trying to convince people that this sort of digital currency was better than like the gold standard or fiat currency. Or then later on when the VCs, the tech VCs came in, they are overrepresented in this too because they are putting tons of money in this stuff so they can reap the benefits. Democratization, right? Decentralization, right? This is where all the money is. It's even more concentrated than the actual like real money fiat currency wealth. It's all rich, wealthy, white tech bros and some old finance people who got in late but had the money to still make a difference for themselves.
Well, and that's who Cory Booker's representing, by the way, because those are his donors and have been his donors since he got into the Senate. So that's the point. That's, I think, a key point here. But
yeah, but I also just want to make one more note about that. Like, let's say it's true that Black people and Latinos are more
Bingo. I know what you're gonna say.
into this stuff. That's not necessarily good. One, like Booker will actually, I'll say this after this because Booker kind of hints at what the real reason is. But the point is, crypto is not a solution to Black people and Latinos being kept out of the traditional banking and financial sectors. It's a huge liability that if this stuff goes south, which I think
it compounds the problem.
It's a problem because they're going to be overrepresented among people wiped out in a financial crisis because they were told to invest in something that does not create value.
It's basically like saying, loan sharks, they're a real exciting, innovative opportunity here because Black people and Latinos are overrepresented in taking out high risk, high interest loans.
I mean,
Jordan like Belfort saying penny stocks really democratizing.
Yeah.
Payday
it's
loans
funny you
are a
bring
burgeoning
him up.
industry.
It's funny you bring up Jordan Belfort because guess who's got his own little NFT project he's promoting?
Of course. Here's a little bit more of Booker.
We are already seeing some of the hopeful, optimistic possibilities in cryptocurrency. It has a democratizing of force. Minorities are overrepresented in using that, and obviously it represent with traditional banking underbanked traditionally. And so for me, this disintermediation possibilities, the democratizing possibilities offer a lot of hope, but I do think this committee has a bit of some urgency to act in this space and create some frameworks and guardrails to protect against the things some of my colleagues have already brought up, like fraud. And so,
I mean, the issue isn't just fraud. The issue is the whole space. The whole space is a Ponzi scheme. It's gonna, and eventually, who knows how long it'll go. It's probably going to end up being whatever ends up happening, well beyond even my lifetime. Who knows? It'll end up being already probably the biggest scam ever perpetuated on people in modern day. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable to me that people are buying into this stuff. And I mean, Cory Booker is obviously not a dumb guy. He's clearly got his reasons for saying these sorts of things, but people will listen to him. People will hear, people will hear these things, and they will say, "Oh, I don't want to be left behind." Not, that's built into the cryptocurrency rhetoric. Not going to make it. Have fun staying poor. That's what they say to people who are no coiners, anti-crypto, or crypto skeptics. I mean, it's this. What other industry that's a legitimate industry does that? Like, what other, like, you don't need to convince people to make money. Like, in this capitalist system, obviously it's something that you have to do, but like, you don't need to be like, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to be left behind. No, but this, you got to pump up your own value, right? Because that's what they do. That's everything this is all about. That's why they promote it so hard, because if you get more people to buy in, the value of what you're holding goes up. And then when those people eventually sell off, it's the people they convince to buy in are going to be left holding the bag.
I agree with that, man. I think any guardrails that Cory Booker or like is referring to putting in place for the crypto or NFT community are going to be guardrails for like those, big Wall Street banks, those big sort of like investment VC capital funds that are, already investing in crypto in more amounts than like your everyday average person can, but, are a little bit trepidatious about getting involved in an economy where like they can be hacked and lose, what on their ledger is supposed to look like 40, 50 million, $1 billion overnight, and there's just no recourse for them to get that money back. I think that your everyday average like crypto investor is still going to be left holding the bag in these scams, but he wants there to be some resources for his donors to like recoup any losses that they accrue as a result of like, I don't know, like what a bank, like putting all of their money into like apes or something and having those like hacked because somebody like sends like a phantom JPEG to their like wallet that like hacks them. So, I think this is about like allowing VCs and banks to play in that space without having to play by the same rules as smaller investors. And then, the rest of us in society who pay taxes, who aren't involved in the crypto game, are going to be left holding the bag too when banks require a huge bailout when this bubble like bursts.
Right. He brought up the unbanked, and that's one of the things I think is the most disingenuous about all of this. Because someone who doesn't have a bank account, they usually it's because they don't have enough money to to basically have the minimum balance, or for various other reasons. Usually people who are impoverished or don't make a lot of money, they don't have a bank account. They have to, when they get their check, they have to go to like a check cashing place. Okay, so they get a fraction of a Bitcoin or a fraction of whatever crypto that Cory Booker's thinking of, even if they get Tether or some other stable coin, which is another scam in all of itself. But okay, so they get this crypto in their cryptocurrency wallet. They need to go buy milk and other food, vegetables, fruits, dinner, lunch, breakfast, whatever at the store. What do they need to do with this crypto? They need to exchange it for real, actual money. So how does this cryptocurrency wallet help them in any way? It doesn't, because it's not a substitution for a bank account.
Yeah.
It's just a high risk speculative asset that you just get the feeling that like more and more rich people who are highly connected want to be more involved with, but they just don't like the risk that comes associated with this unregulated, essentially scam economy, not to borrow the name of your show, Matt. And they are the people who have Cory Booker's ears, not the unbanked homeless population, or the unbanked like people who have bad credit who can't get a bank account because of that. It's just the people who would love to put more money in crypto, but what if they get left holding the bag? That can't happen.
Right. All right, with that said, let's do one more little segment here at the end, because I know we love Barry Weiss here, right, with this group.
Big fan.
Ooh.
She's great.
Yeah, so Barry Weiss, the person who canceled herself because New York Times wouldn't cancel her from her employer, the New York Times. She really just desperately wanted to ride that aggrievement to a bigger payday. Now she does have a large Substack. She wrote a poem about Ukraine. I want to read it for you guys.
Oh boy!
Oh, I wish we had
written?
The soundboard here. I thought this would be perfect with the rose behind it, but here we go.
You sure she wrote this one? It's not a reading of a poem written by U2's Bono?
No, and it's not a poem, a reading by the illustrious poet of our time, Annalyn McCord, either. This is her own work. We say, I'm a brand. Follow me. Like me.
It's already bad.
Zelensky says, I am not iconic. Ukraine is iconic. We ask, is America ill-gotten? Zelensky says, Ukraine is mine. We say words put us in danger. Zelensky says, I will never surrender. We LARP on Twitter and work hard to get people fired for bad Halloween costumes. Ukrainians line up for guns, and I say I want to defend what I love. We take down statues of our founding fathers, of Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson, and they say glory to Ukraine.
Each one the name there.
Yeah. We say there is no real truth, only power. They say might does not make right. We say anyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi, which, by the way, is exactly what Putin said to justify his invasion. Wow.
Wish I had my black turtleneck.
Right.
Right on.
The contrast between what she's trying to say and what is happening in Ukraine is not clear, but these are the kinds of high-level important ideas that people want to hear. They'll pay good money to hear it, in fact.
I think
just one sec. We're pulling this up really quickly, Brandon, then you can weigh in, because I just want people to understand that, these ideas are not free. You have to be able to access, you have to pay good money to hear the intelligent thoughts of somebody like Barry Weiss.
Yeah, like imagine if I don't know, Oscar Wilde was on one of his sort of speaking tours around the States. Well, Barry Weiss is also going to be.
You would pay good money for that, to witness a legend in action and to just bask in their intellectual might. The Yale William F. Buckley Jr. program is hosting Barry Weiss.
More cursed string of language.
Well, I mean, see, you're judging, Matt, but what you don't know is that she's going to be on Def Poetry Jam right after. So that shows you what you know.
Right, exactly. the pricing for this, do we have that?
Pricing is so yes, I would like to be a sponsor of the 6th annual disinvitation dinner. I love how I have never heard of the disinvitation dinner before this. I wonder who was disinvited before.
They're going for the alliteration.
I like cancel corner better.
Cancel cocktails.
Suppression supper.
Yeah.
Featuring Barry Weiss and the following level. Diamond sponsor for $50,000. A dinner for table for 10. Okay, so 5,000 a person. Premier seating. Recognition from the podium.
That sounds like pay to play.
I mean, look, if you become a $10 member of Left Reckoning, David and I will build a podium and we'll recognize you from it. Recognition from the podium, acknowledgement in the dinner program. I mean, $50,000, that is a bargain and a half.
Yeah, to get Barry Weiss to say your name.
If you send me $50,000, I will go to the event. I won't buy a $50,000 ticket, but I'll buy a $5,000 ticket and use the rest to get incredibly wasted beforehand.
Well, if 50,000 is too much, perhaps you might want the more affordable platinum sponsorship, which is $25,000. That's just dinner for table for 10. Prime seating, not premier, so you're getting prime but not premier. I like these. You have a different relationship with the language when you get really wealthy. I find out, like the
premier to prime.
Like, oh, are we in prime or are we in premier? I'm not happy about this.
Because then there's preferred seating.
It's like buying opera tickets at the Met or whatever. You know, it's just impossible. It's like, what is orchestra, right?
Yeah. Acknowledgement in the dinner program. All these do get you. So even the gold and the silver sponsor, which is 15,000 and 5,000 respectively, you do get. The gold is dinner table for 10. Silver is dinner seating for 2. Preferred seating and acknowledgement in the dinner program. So that dinner program, you're gonna want to save that because it might be the only lasting memory of what you.
Except for just like the irreplaceable memory of Barry Weiss saying your name as if she's reading off a Patreon patron in a podcast.
And I don't know if we know what this money goes toward.
I would hope starting University of Austin, that other project she has going had never materialized.
What happened to that? Right, I forgot.
Have you enrolled yet? I thought you were.
I'm too old to enroll at the University of Austin. It's only for newly accepted college graduates through to people who have just recently graduated, and I have not just recently graduated from college, unfortunately. And that being said, they don't have accreditation yet, so they're just, I think, riding the whole like summer programs of truth train where they take your money and don't provide any value.
It sounds like they're being ageist if they're still if they're just not admitting people who
I like to think
ages.
I like to think of it like how how like any kind of like poisonous creature is like bright red. It's like if I choose to like sort of go around the the obvious warning of like I'm not welcome here and like go to it and something bad happens to me, then I'm the one who's responsible. So I'm just gonna appreciate the block from my engagement.
So just a little bit more history on the disinvitation dinner. This is from a guest columnist to Yale News. This is from 2019. This April, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger will headline the William F. Buckley Jr. program's 5th annual disinvitation dinner. The dinner is largely a symbolic affair representing a recommitment to the Buckley program's stated values of free speech and intellectual diversity. Established in 2015, the Buckley program's disinvitation dinner provides platforms to controversial speakers who have been protested or disinvited for their views. It's a countermeasure to the fabled epidemic of censorship. Thank you for this, Nora Moreau and the Yale, for calling it fabled. Fabled epidemic of censorship that has supposedly infected our nation's campuses. Previous guests have included the likes of Charles Murray, a political scientist infamous for his quote work on race and IQ, and George Will. But yeah, this person says like those people are like understandable in terms of like owning the libs perspective, but Kissinger is an actual war criminal, so I guess in that sense Barry Weiss is an improvement.
Were you guys not moved by the poem though?
I'm not a big like newsletter person. I haven't like really been keeping up with the Substack thing, but Barry Weiss's is always a constant source of amusement. I love her little stories about people getting canceled for like throwing tantrums about the silliest stuff.
I know. If only she was able to have firsthand experience. Too bad. All right, we're gonna read some IMs and then we are going to get out of here. MG Monk Lewis. This poem Emma's reading is the worst thing Stevie Smith ever wrote. I don't get it. Death pulled from furniture. Rich of Barry to talk about getting people fired when she spent all of her college years trying to do that. Yes. Log, Emma, have you seen Mia Mulder's video essay, Should Trans Women Be Allowed in Women's Sports? Mia is a trans historian and does an excellent job diving into the history of sports, the nuances of biology, and the transphobia driving reactions. No, but I'm going to write that down now. Mia Mulders. Tulsi Vigeland, hey, just an FYI, probably no connection, but Instagram ceased operating in Russia and Tulsi Gabbard's Instagram videos have plummeted. I hope it's because she's just awful and not because she's an alleged Russian asset.
Oh, she complained about that on air, right? She complained. She was like, I'm being blacklisted on Instagram because I usually get 250,000 to 300,000 views on my videos, and my last one just got 15,000 views.
Is she still doing where she does the calisthenics and then like talks about stuff?
We may be saving that video for another soon to be aired show.
Oh. Ooh.
Murray Fiorti. I am a new member and big fan. Sam and I don't agree on everything or even that much, but I respect him and his consistency in debate. I would call myself a libertarian, and there's a specific issue I would like to debate with Sam. Tomorrow's a big day for me personally, and also a Friday, Casual Friday specifically. If you have time in your schedule, it would mean a lot if I could come on and have a respectful conversation with Sam about this one specific topic. If not, no big deal. Of course, you owe me nothing. We all know neither Sam nor I employ one another. Murray the Orc.
I'm sorry, but when I hear libertarians say one specific topic, I really like, I can't help but think about the age of consent.
That's the first thing I thought about too.
Yeah.
So I thought it's just like,
please do call in. Please do call in.
It shouldn't be that though. I would.
You go BJ. I don't get it. Okay. Yeah. Emma, Matt, what do you think about Judge talking about how great this country is and how anyone who work hard can achieve their dream and wishes come true?
I think it's what you should expect from a judge in the United States of America. Obviously I don't believe in meritocracy myths in America.
Oh, it says you go KBJ. So.
Oh, okay.
Nothing bad.
Sorry.
Yeah. RIM names are typically like more crude, but I don't think much of it. I don't know.
I think the only point where I felt she had been indoctrinated into American exceptionalism and elitism. I mean, I don't know, guys. These are Supreme Court justices, most likely. Like,
yes, they have.
They're not. We're not going to get she's one of the better people we can get on the Supreme Court, but that institution and honestly,
based on the coalitions in power right now,
judiciary, it's
That's just the case for all our politicians. They always have to give lip service to American exceptionalism. And it's not harmless in the sense that it makes people who are downstream from them probably believe more in that myth than otherwise. But I would never expect to hear anything else from a national level politician. But America is really good, great, so much potential, but we have a lot of problems we need to fix.
Yeah, redeemable is where the closest you get to that, I think.
Yeah. Freudian slip and slide. Thanks, Matt, for highlighting that telling kids about bodies and sexuality early explicitly protects them from exploitation. I've worked in youth mental health for years, and a primary challenge for working through problems is that kids aren't given knowledge to protect themselves and each other.
Yep.
It's deranged to think that lying to children protects them. That says Freudian slip and slide wrote in and said that.
And say we had a better coalition in power, they could be forcefully turning that back on Republicans as, the Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan party that they are.
And, I think oftentimes lying to kids is about parents' anxieties about having those conversations. Maybe not to the level that Joe Rogan feels like it's gross, but just everyone knows that person in their life, whether it was their parent or even their sex ed teacher who was just clearly uncomfortable talking about sex, just clearly uncomfortable saying the words penis and vagina in any kind of medical or even just casual, setting. And that's just something that we have to work at a younger level so that when they grow up to be adults, they don't feel that way about not just gay people but about sexuality in general.
Exactly. Say Gay Day says, I think it's high time someone tell Republicans that second grade is not full of 2-year-old children. Mark Monkey, the cheap vodka you're thinking of is Poprov. Maybe.
I think it changes depending on where you were in the country, but I'm pretty sure it's the same vodka.
Pennsylvania. I can picture the label. It's yellow and red, but I just don't
remember.
Yeah,
I went to college in Ohio, and I can picture it. I think I had the same kind.
Yeah. Justin, everything in today's economy in the USA market is to create new passive income for rich descendants. Yeah. Dan from PA. Hey, MR crew, keep up the good work. I was listening to Binder's Doom pod from yesterday. It reminded me of a story about a trans boxer, Patricio Manuel. He transitioned F to M and won his professional debut fighting against another man. Very inspirational story and cuts against everything these transphobes claim. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that's so hard about this issue is that they're literally in a can't win situation, because if they win, then they're under suspicion.
Yeah.
If they don't win, then no one gives a fuck.
I just as a like sort of a pet theory, I think a lot of that too is just like the ways in which men who are not trans men or trans women, but who are like the Joe Rogan types, overestimate their own abilities at sports. Where, you know, it's like that old like poll they do, like even like untrained tennis players, like people who've never played tennis before, but are men, think that they could beat like Serena Williams in like a tennis match. And it's like,
I mean,
no,
it's
she would
battle of the sexes or
like
whatever.
serve your like the
Yeah.
ball through your face. And like, but it's just so it's easy for guys like that to be convinced that like, yeah, you have an inherent physical advantage from being like a man in any competition with a woman, trained or not, and like independent of those things.
It gives
Because, I
them
mean,
a sense of power, and it's also like there's a way that in culture, sports are like a cultural display of masculinity in general, and so there's like there's a sense of comfort that a lot of men feel in like seeing that be kind of the dominant in that way. I don't know.
Oh, I mean that, and also like they have a weird. I think there's that, but it also combines in a lot of cases with a weird anxiety about the innate homoeroticism of a lot of sports.
Mhm.
Like just watching a bunch of like, you know, sweaty men grapple on the ground, which is again about your own neuroses and more so than like the actual sport itself. But you know, if you don't keep certain aspects out of the sport, like too many women in sports, it just makes it, you know, gayer.
All right, 5 more. Kintaji, we're sorry. Emma, I must say the SCOTUS nomination hearing was nothing short of humiliating and disgraceful. As an American, our worst was seen and experienced by millions as anti-CRT, anti-trans, anti-gay, anti-abortion rights activists and senators tried to challenge Judge Kintaji, prodding her to disturb her. Yeah, it was disturbing, for sure.
I don't think people have a high expectation of America though, so I don't think it surprised anyone.
This is who we are.
Yeah.
Tom LeFink, Emma, I saw you were tweeting about who the Giants should draft this year. May I offer about half of Wales men's national rugby union team? They were diabolical on Saturday against Italy. I could throw in a head coach as well. Sure. Jimmy from the cul-de-sac, you guys are too harsh on Greenwald. If Greenwald was a libertarian, why did he risk his life in exposing the car wash scandal in Brazil and thereby helping Lula get his freedom?
I think Greenwald's disclosures that he's made are fair enough and like welcome and great. I think there's also criticisms that could be made about the way Greenwald took ownership of certain leaks. I don't think that it's entirely condemnatory of Greenwald. I think it's understandable, but I think those conversations are open to be had. But I think Glenn Greenwald's political positions and his punditry is just clearly like GOP, but doesn't want to say it.
Yeah.
Like, and so like I reject the idea we're being too harsh on him. I think he's being too harsh on the libs and too apologetic for people like Tucker Carlson.
All right, this is the final I am of the day. Hitchens Ghost. Hey, I'm our crew. Love all you do. I grew up in Sturgis and can tell you that rally has gutted our town. This is how Left Reckoning. Almost no local businesses can afford to pay rent on Main Street, so it's a ghost town all year until the rally takes place. Rich out-of-towners have bought up the empty stores, which they fill with leather jackets, t-shirts, gear, knives, and other biker-friendly items each August. They make enough money in those weeks to pay the rent all year, ensuring no actual stores can even attempt to open. Sorry, kids, just go smoke weed and have sex. Nothing to do here. Though there is a community center, it's expensive. Why not subsidize it with rally money, for crying out loud? Also, last year, the locals were given a choice: skip the rally and pay higher taxes to make up the revenue, or hold the rally during COVID. Most were against it, even in red rural America. They voted not to hold the rally, but the powers that be decided instead to hold the rally and raise taxes. Meanwhile, students use textbooks in school with our parents' names on the inside cover. Literally true in my case when I was a kid in the 90s. Where does all the money go?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is it's like, oh, look at all these giant profits going up, and it's all going to small number of private individuals, and yeah, it's horrible.
All right, folks, great show. Thank you guys so much. See you tomorrow.
I'll see you Saturday.
See you Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're going to, I'll see you guys Saturday. And
Yeah, I mean, you guys, not
yeah.
the particular.
All right, bye
listener, I
bye.
don't know.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot lights shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes